Chapter 795. Considering the filming environment, we've changed the doll to a backpack. Eric gestured to Ivanka with a green, oval-shaped backpack with exaggerated eyes and slender limbs. Although the backpack looked a little weird at first glance, it was not at all cute like the bunnies and bears, but the way it grinned was a little cute. Hey, don't underestimate it. It's called Mike, the main character of Disney's next animated movie. The trailer hasn't even been released yet, so you'll definitely be the first to see Mike. Oh, don't look down on it. It's called Mike, the main character of Disney's next animated movie. The trailer hasn't even been released yet, so you'll definitely be the first to see it. Standing opposite Eric, Ivanka was wearing the same one-piece tennis dress as Giselle and the other two girls. Feeling the teasing, and interest of the people around her, she was very shy. Blushing slightly, she softly interrupted Eric. Eric, can you stop nagging? I didn't say that I don't want to. Eric was stunned and stopped talking. He handed the backpack to the girl and said regretfully, you've changed. Many of the crew members on the scene had been following Eric's old team since Home Alone. They clearly remembered the past when Eric coaxed and occasionally took out $20 to let Ivanka appear in the movie. Hearing Eric's words, they finally couldn't help but laugh at the same time. Even if the others didn't quite understand what was going on, they also laughed along. The scene was cheerful. Eric looked at the girl who ran away because of shyness, clapped his hands and said loudly, "Okay, everyone get ready for the shoot. Those who haven't finished laughing, save it for after work." The scene in front of them was about when the Spectre accidentally discovered Bond's identity. They thought that Alex and his wife might have betrayed the organization, so they decisively executed them. Bond saw Alex being assassinated with his own eyes and realized that Katarina was also in danger. He hurried back to Paradise Island, but unfortunately he was still one step too late. Like many Bond girls, Katarina died on the big bed in a fancy dress. In order to find out the truth, Bond went to the Ocean Club Center to check the surveillance videos before and after Katarina's death. Casino Royale, Act 21, Scene 3 Action. Bond parked the car and walked to the square in front of the Ocean Club Center. He squatted down and pretended to tie his shoelaces while looking up at the surveillance cameras around. Another Bond's subjective perspective camera swept across the place where the cameras were installed in front of the square and the surrounding crowd. In the front left of the camera, four young girls in white tennis skirts walked over together, talking and laughing. After all, it was the first time Giselle and the other two girls had participated in a movie shoot, and Ivanka hadn't had such an experience in a long time. Although it was a long-distance shot, the four girls' expressions were still very unnatural. Miranda even glanced at the camera curiously. Eric shouted cut, and personally went forward to explain the essentials to the girls. Then he continued. After that, they shot 5 more times in a row, but the results were not very good. Eric had to gather the girls again. Giselle and the other two girls looked nervous. Even Ivanka looked a little nervous. Looking at the pitiful looks of the girls, Eric couldn't get angry. He comforted them. Relax. Just talk and walk as usual. Just pretend that the people around you and the cameras don't exist. However, I have to remind you that everyone's time is very precious. So, you can only try 3 more times. If the results are still not good enough, I will have to cut out the scenes of your faces. At that time, you will only be able to show your backs. Come, take a deep breath and relax. The girls obediently took a deep breath at the same time. Following their movements, Eric couldn't help but look down slightly. These little vixens were really well developed. Throwing away these messy thoughts, Eric clapped his hands and said, "Okay, continue with the burials. Let's do it again." Perhaps because of the threat of the scene being cut out, the girls' performance finally broke through a little. After 2 more shots, they successfully passed. In the next shooting, the girls brushed past Bond. Bond was mistaken by the tourists as a parking valet. When he was parking the car, he created a small chaos in the parking lot and led the security guards away. From the surveillance video of Katarina's murder, he found the 2 killers. Relying on the clues of the 2 killers, Bond used the intelligence channel of the MI6 in the Bahamas to track them all the way to Miami. He destroyed the conspiracy of an organization that attempted to blow up the latest prototype of Sky Arrow Airlines that was about to be tested. Thus, he started a head-on confrontation with the Ghost Gang. Of course, these scenes definitely couldn't be completed in a day. After roughly completing a few scenes in the Ocean Club Center, the day's shooting work was over. Dinner time, in the resort restaurant where Casino Royale was stationed. Ms. Zelnikova, I'm glad you can bring Ivanka here. At the dining table, Eric once again expressed his gratitude to Ivanka's mother. He happened to experience the divorce of Ivanka's parents. Although the couple had some disagreements, Ivanka Zelnikova was the mother of Donald's 3 children after all. After a few years, the relationship between the two sides had eased up. Ivanka Zelnikova said, "It's our honor, Eric. When we came over, Donald asked me to send his regards to you." "Oh, what has he been busy with recently?" Eric asked casually. At the same time, he kicked a restless little foot under the table, warning Miranda next to him to stop making trouble. Giselle and the other 2 girls were sitting next to him. The 6 of them were sitting around a round table. Seeing that Eric only cared about talking to Ivanka and her daughter, the girl was obviously a little jealous. Ivanka Zelnikova thought for a while and looked at her daughter next to her. Ivanka said, "Dad went to Washington. It seems that he received an invitation from the president and his wife." This year happened to be the election year in the United States. Several candidates were desperately trying to win over the support of all parties. Eric was not surprised. He had received such invitations more than once, but he did not want to get too deeply involved in these things. Of course, because different presidents' governing philosophies would be very different. Eric did not want the next president to suddenly become a family that only knew how to fight for oil all over the world. In order to avoid too many changes in history, Eric still chose to support Clinton. Although he did not like this person, he also privately donated a campaign fund to him. The Clintons also wanted to visit Los Angeles in person for this reason, but Eric refused. However, the couple still expressed their gratitude many times over the phone. After all, Eric's donation did not only represent a check of hundreds of thousands of dollars, but also the attitude of the entire Firefly group in this election. At the current scale of Firefly's development, every administration's strategy could affect the development of the group. Even if Eric did not want to get too involved in the governance, he had to choose a side that was in line with his own interests in this matter. At this time, when he heard Ivanka's words, Eric remembered something from his previous life and asked, "Your father seems to have said that he also wants to run for president, right?" Ivanka did not know why, but she still nodded. Eric asked half-jokingly, "Hey, Innie, what do you think your father will be like after he is elected president?" Ivanka tilted her head and thought seriously. Then she smiled shyly, but she did not answer Eric's question. She did not want to say bad things about her father to his face. Eric just casually mentioned it and quickly changed the topic. He said to Ivanka Zelnikova, "If you are not in a hurry to go back, you two can stay in the Bahamas for a few more days. This resort has been booked by the crew. There are still some spare rooms. We will probably stay here for a month." "Thank you for your hospitality, Eric," Ivanka Zelnikova said with a smile. Ivanka was already on summer vacation, so the mother and daughter were not in a hurry to go back to New York. After dinner, Eric checked the materials for today's shoot as usual. It was almost 9 o'clock before he returned to his residence. This resort had just been built, and most of it was a standalone hotel-style apartment. The other crew members all squeezed into one apartment. Eric's identity was special, and in addition to his directing work, he often had to deal with some affairs from Firefly's system. It was not convenient for him to live with others, so he occupied an apartment by himself. When he returned to his residence, Eric's assistant was already waiting there. "Mr. Williams, this is the script for the sequel of The Matrix that was sent from Los Angeles this morning. In addition, there is a detailed financial statement for the group's television business for the new year." The assistant introduced one by one and handed several documents to Eric. "Okay, you go back and rest first." Eric sent the assistant away and walked into the living room. He put the documents on the coffee table and stretched his tired body after a busy day. He was about to take a shower when there was a soft knock on the door. Guessing who it was, Eric smiled and shook his head. He opened the door and saw Giselle and the other two girls standing outside. Seeing Eric looking at the three of them silently, Giselle took the initiative to say, "Eric, we want to say good night to you. Come in." Eric stepped aside and the three girls walked into the living room together. Giselle and Alexander saw Miranda throw herself on the sofa and sat down. However, when they noticed Eric looking at the three of them with a smile, Giselle quickly got up and said, "Eric, do you want coffee? I'll get it for you." "In the kitchen." "Don't make it too strong," Eric said. Miranda picked up the remote control and turned on the TV. He said, "You watch TV first. Don't touch the documents on the table. I'm going to take a shower." The two girls nodded obediently, and Eric went upstairs. After taking a shower, Eric changed into a casual t-shirt and jeans. When he went downstairs, he saw the three girls sitting on two sofas. Giselle and Alexander were occupying the two-seater sofa, and Miranda was curled up on the one-seater sofa like a kitten without a care. Eric walked to the other sofa with a thick stack of documents in his arms. He picked up the advertising tender report and opened it. He asked Giselle casually, "This month's issue of Vogue should be published soon. What about the cover?" "It won't be published until the 10th, but I want to show it to you." Giselle took out her bag and took out a stack of photos. She sat down on the armrest of the sofa. Eric closed the financial report and took the photos from Giselle. He admired them one by one. In the photos, the girl was wearing light smoky makeup, a light gray ladies windbreaker, and high heels. She was half lying on a rectangular prop and looking at the camera seductively like a lazy cat. Miranda came over and looked at the photos in Eric's hands. "Wow, so beautiful. But Eric, I can take photos like this too." Eric smiled. Giselle ignored Miranda and picked out a picture of her sitting on the sofa like a queen. With a hoarse voice, she said excitedly, "Eric, this is the one that's going to be on the cover." However, Anna said that the effect of these pictures is very good and gave me 6 more pictures of the inner pages. Eric was also satisfied with the photos. "You'll be busy when this issue of Vogue is published. Work hard." "Of course. In fact, thank you, Eric," Giselle said and bent down carefully. Eric didn't object, so she kissed him on the cheek. However, Giselle didn't manage to keep her balance. When she was about to sit down, she fell into Eric's arms. Miranda, who was sitting on the other armrest, kicked her legs in dissatisfaction. Eric helped Giselle sit down and grabbed Miranda's restless long legs. After admiring them for a while, he said with a smile, "It's only 9 months. Don't torture yourself anymore." Because her legs were caught by Eric, Miranda leaned against the armrest in a strange posture. Her face was slightly red. Of course, she couldn't understand Eric's bad taste. She asked curiously, "What 9 months?" Eric patted Giselle's long, straight legs under her hot pants. "Hey, this is a year. Alexander is also a year. You're 9 months. Giselle and Alexander were puzzled by Eric's novel unit of measurement, but it didn't stop them from looking at Miranda with some smugness. Miranda rubbed against Eric unhappily and compared herself with the other 2 girls. "I'm not 9 months old. Well, at least 10 months. And I'm still growing." "Well, there will be a day when you're 10 months old." Eric let go of the girl's legs and said, "Okay, go watch TV. Go back to bed on time." Miranda said coquettishly, "Eric, can I sleep here?" "No. But I'm afraid of the dark." Miranda continued to find excuses, and even betrayed Giselle and Isabella a little. She pretended to be casual and said, "The 2 of them sleep together, but I'm alone. I asked them to sleep together." "Well, I'll find you a partner when I'm free, okay?" "No way." Chapter 796. In between the filming of Casino Royale, Eric spent a week reading the Wachowskis' script for the 2 sequels to The Matrix. Although the plot of the new script was slightly different from the original, the confusing plot style was still the same. In the original space-time, the Wachowskis had enough production power because of the success of the first film, so they tried their best to stuff the 2 sequels with their own ideas. The first film of The Matrix, with its cool action design, innovative filming techniques, and deep philosophical content, caused a huge response on a global scale, and gathered a large number of fans. The second sequel, although the plot began to collapse, but with the accumulated box office appeal of the first film, and the coolness supported by a large number of special effects, it still reaped more than $700 million in box office worldwide. However, the overall quality of the second film was far lower than the first, and it quickly consumed the accumulated popularity of the series, directly causing the third film's box office to plummet. Many people felt that the reason why the third film of The Matrix had the lowest box office in the series was related to Time Warner's too-rush scheduling. The two sequels were released less than half a year apart. But in fact, from Time Warner's steady brand management of the Harry Potter series over the past 10 years, it was not that they did not understand the principle that a series released too close to each other would affect the box office. It was just that The Matrix 3 was completely mediocre and low quality, so Time Warner did not dare to delay it. Therefore, with the intention of getting as much money as possible, they arranged for the film to be released as early as possible before the popularity of The Matrix had completely cooled down. The facts also proved that Time Warner's decision was correct. With The Matrix 3's completely bad reputation, if it was delayed for a year or two, the influence of the first two films would have dissipated. By then, it would be good if the box office could reach $300 million worldwide, and it would be impossible to reach the $400 million mark. Eric also hoped that the two sequels could be shot consecutively, so that they could save a lot of money. However, to avoid the mistakes of the Matrix series, Eric dismissed the idea. In his reply to the Wachowskis, he rejected the consecutive shooting plan, and asked the brothers to rewrite the script. Eric also made up his mind that if the script did not satisfy him, the series would be shelved for a long time. Firefly had collected enough copyright resources over the past few years. Marvel alone was enough to develop for 30 years. Therefore, the company did not rely too much on these popular series, and had enough confidence to pursue excellence. Los Angeles. The release of The Matrix had entered its third week. Due to the lack of strong new releases, the box office only dropped by 21% in the second week, earning another $61.97 million, bringing the total box office to $140 million in 2 weeks. It happened to be a Saturday, and Katzenberg didn't have the time to rest. When he received Eric's reply about the script for The Matrix, he specially invited the Wachowskis to have breakfast at Firefly Studios in Praia Vista, and told them about Eric's decision. Eric means that you can add your own ideas, but the premise is that the sequel script must be a complete and smooth story. On the other hand, the script you've given us is more like fragments. If we don't even have a complete story, the official filming will undoubtedly be a disaster. Therefore, the script has to be rewritten. The specific opinions are in the document. Katzenberg handed a folder to the two brothers sitting opposite him, and continued. In addition, Eric has also rejected the plan to shoot 2 episodes in a row. You can only do it one by one. The brothers were obviously a little depressed and even angry at Eric's request for them to completely rewrite the script. The two brothers felt that the success of The Matrix was largely due to them adding their own ideas. However, the copyright of The Matrix was firmly in the hands of Firefly. Firefly even maintained the right to replace the director. Although the brothers naturally obtained some bargaining power after the movie's box office explosion, and Firefly couldn't easily change the director, the initiative was still in Firefly's hands. Andy Wachowski's took the folder and flipped it open. It was the script he had left behind, but there were some comments on it. After thinking about it, Andy Wachowski's argued, "Jeffrey, if the script is completely rewritten, it may take a long time. Maybe it won't be done in a year or 2. By then, the popularity of the movie would have already passed. So I think we can completely revise the script based on this draft. Unless a Hollywood movie became a cultural phenomenon like Star Wars, there would still be a large number of die-hard fans after more than 10 years. Otherwise, the production of sequels would take 2 to 3 years. If the gap was too long, the accumulated popularity of the previous movie might have disappeared by more than half, and the risk of the sequel's box office would skyrocket." Although the Wachowskis hadn't been in Hollywood for long, they already understood this principle, which was why they said this with a faint threat. If the script is completely overturned, The two brothers can't guarantee that the movie will be able to start production in the next few years. Of course, Katzenberg understood the brothers' words. He said, Eric happened to mention this point. If the script continues to be unsatisfactory, Firefly will put the series on hold for a long time. Larry Wachowski suddenly said, if the project is put on hold for a long time, what about the agreement we signed with Firefly? In the beginning, as a condition for obtaining the rights to direct The Matrix, the Wachowskis had signed an option contract with Firefly for 3 movies. In other words, before the 3 movies with Firefly were completed, the brothers couldn't cooperate with other movie companies. Otherwise, it would be considered a breach of contract. In order to ensure that the trilogy of The Matrix could be completed, the original, Wildflowers, was not included in this contract. In other words, the brothers still owed Firefly 2 movie contracts. When Katzenberg heard Larry Wachowski's question, he shrugged slightly and said, so, I suggest that you focus on the sequel script. Andy Wachowski's probed, if the script can't be completed for a long time, can we make other movies? Or first cooperate with other movie companies? For other films, as long as the project is good enough, it might be possible. Katzenberg replied ambiguously. However, if you want to cooperate with other film companies, unless you complete the contract, it's impossible. Firefly used The Matrix to make you famous, not for you to use your fame to make money for other film companies. There's no such logic in Hollywood. Katzenberg's increasingly tough tone made the brothers very unhappy, but what was depressing was that they also knew that it would be difficult for them to get out of this contract. At this point, there wasn't much for both sides to talk about. Andy Wachowski's put away the folder in front of him expressionlessly, got up and said, we understand. If there's nothing else, we'll take our leave. Katzenberg got up and politely extended his hand to the brothers. Then goodbye. After personally sending the Wachowskis out of the restaurant, Katzenberg returned to his seat. Frank Wales had already sat down. He had been in the restaurant just now, but he didn't disturb Katzenberg and the Wachowskis' conversation. When Katzenberg sat down, Frank Wales said, Jeffrey, you don't have to be so stiff with them. You can be more gentle. It's your job to appease people. I don't have such an obligation. Katzenberg joked with a smile. He had seen the Wachowskis' Crazy Flowers, and the recent sequel to The Matrix had a confusing script. With so many years of production experience in Hollywood, Katzenberg felt that the brothers wouldn't have much success in Hollywood other than The Matrix. Both of them were too obsessed with their own world of films. This strong personal style might give them a chance to win an Oscar, but it would be difficult for them to make a difference in the box office. As for the Oscars, Katzenberg was also not very interested. He felt that the most fundamental purpose of a film company was to pursue profits. Honors were just icing on the cake. When he was in charge of Disney Animation, whenever the animators wanted to increase the artistry of the animation, Katzenberg would mock them by saying, do you want to win an Oscar? This sentence even became his catchphrase. Well, whenever you need me to appease people, just let me know, Frank Wales also joked. Frank Wales had been a well-known moderate in the company since the Disney era. In the 80s, Disney's board of directors had originally intended for him and Eisner to be the joint CEO of Disney. The various powers had been arguing over this, and it was Frank Wales who had offered to be Eisner's deputy that resolved the impasse. In the Firefly era, because of the appearance of Eric, Frank Wales escaped the plane crash that he should have encountered in the original spacetime. Katzenberg took over, and Frank Wales still conscientiously served as the second-in-command of the Firefly group. His mellow character also made most of the company's management respect him, including Katzenberg. The two chatted and finished a cup of coffee. Frank Wales calmly handed a box office data to Katzenberg and said, our box office situation this week doesn't seem to be very good. According to Hollywood's box office statistics cycle, yesterday was the first day of the new week. Katzenberg did not have time to check Friday's box office data report. Katzenberg took the A for that Frank Wales handed over, and looked at the data table. Just at first glance, Katzenberg frowned slightly. The first place in the box office for the new week was not Firefly's Fatal Island, but a black comedy from Universal Pictures called The Fat Professor. This seems to be Eddie Murphy's new film? As the head of Firefly, Katzenberg knew his competitors' blockbuster new films like the back of his hand. But before this, he did not pay special attention to this black comedy starring Eddie Murphy, so his tone was a little doubtful. Since the box office failure of Beverly Hills Detective 3, Eddie Murphy had been a little quiet in the past few years. In other words, many people, including Katzenberg, thought that with the strong momentum shown by Firefly, Fatal Island would almost certainly take the first place in the box office on the first day and the first week. However, the result was that the box office of Fat Professor was $7.9 million on the first day, while the box office of Life-Threatening Island was $7.4 million on the first day. Although there was not much difference, and there was even a possibility of a reversal on Saturday and Sunday, Life-Threatening Island lost on the first day of release. When this unexpected box office data came out, Frank Wales could not reach Katzenberg on the phone, so he hurriedly came here. Yes, Frank Wales nodded and said with a worried tone. I don't think this is a good sign. You know, there's also Cameron's Titanic. Although Katzenberg also felt that something was wrong, he still comforted him. Let's call Brian and the others from the distribution department for a meeting later to discuss it first. But Frank, this is only the first day's data. Besides, we have nothing to worry about. Even if we really encounter 1 or 2 box office failures, Firefly's stock price will not fall by 10% because we are not listed at all, haha. Katzenberg smiled and continued. What's more, you've seen the income from the recent TV advertising bidding. I just think that Eric's strategy of making films in the past few years is a little too risky. It's either a newcomer or a super big production. Although, well, Michael Bay, David Fincher, and the Wachowski brothers have all proven their strength, our good luck may not last forever. I think we need to communicate with Eric properly. He shouldn't be so capricious anymore. Katzenberg could feel the sincerity in Frank Wales' tone. He was really thinking for Firefly. In fact, Katzenberg had the same feeling. It was just that although he knew that Eric was definitely not the kind of person who was headstrong and self-opinionated, so far, although the films led by Eric had their box office failures, in general, none of them had encountered a very tragic failure. This was almost a miracle in Hollywood. For someone who had not experienced failure, running out and telling him that his method was wrong, that the rules were not like this, that he should do this, that he should do that, Katzenberg thought about it and felt that this scene was a little strange. There had always been only one rule in Hollywood: the winner takes all. If your film could achieve high box office and make investors rich, then you would be a hero in Hollywood. I agree with your point of view. Katzenberg thought about it and said, it's just that now is not the right time. We should probably wait until the end of the year. Well, at that time, Eric should be more receptive to our opinions. Obviously, Katzenberg was not optimistic about the box office prospects of Titanic. Frank Wales immediately understood when he heard this. He nodded and said, okay, then we'll talk about it when the time comes. By the way, over at FFM, Wayne Stan suggested that he wants to buy Brad Gray's production company. Have you received the report? Well, Harvey wants to set up the production department of FFM. Brad Gray happens to be his former deputy. He probably wants to use an acquaintance. However, I think it's a bit unnecessary to buy Brad Gray's production company. Other than the TV series that Eric personally picked, Brad Gray's production company has some investment rights. I don't think there's anything valuable about it. When the two talked about FFM, the topic just now was unknowingly changed. Chapter 797. Bahamas, Nassau International Airport. Around the spacious venue, a few high-powered lights illuminated the enclosed area of the airport. It was already the third day of filming at Nassau International Airport. The crew of Casino Royale was nervously arranging the setting for the next scene. The scene they were filming was the climax of the first part of Casino Royale. Bond chased the terrorists all the way to Miami International Airport and destroyed the terrorists' plot against Heaven's Arrow. This part of the scene involved car chases, gunfights, explosions, and other thrilling scenes. It was more difficult to film. To prevent any accidents from affecting the filming process, Eric arranged for this part of the scene to be shot in the middle of the filming period in the Bahamas. After this part of the scene was shot, the crew would continue with the unfinished scene. Because this part of the scene was a night scene, in order not to affect the normal operation of Nassau International Airport, after negotiating with the Bahamas crew could film in the designated area for 8 hours from 8 o'clock in the evening to 4 o'clock in the morning. In the script, the airport scene was about 10 minutes long. Among them, there was a 6-minute action scene where Bond stopped the bomber from driving the refueling truck into the Heaven's Aero prototype. It was a classic car chase scene. In just 6 minutes, the fight between Bond and the bomber, the departure of the Heaven's Aero prototype, the interception of the refueling truck by the police, the riot of the crowd at the airport, and so on were perfectly integrated through fast and sharp camera editing. In the tense and exciting soundtrack, as the refueling truck approached the prototype of the Heaven's Aero step by step, all the audience's minds were firmly suspended in this situation. Finally, as the bomber detonated the bomb that Bond hung on his body, the sound of a bang was like a release of extreme depression, which made the audience involuntarily feel a sense of relief. Of course, although the car chase scene looked good, it was extremely tedious to film. There were a lot of difficult scenes. Just the preparation time alone was usually several hours. In order to create a sense of realism, there were all kinds of planes, cars, and extras on the set. It was a big test of the director's ability to control the scene. Before filming, Eric had entered the airport with the crew many times to study the shooting plan. At the same time, he made minor adjustments to the shooting plan based on the scenes in his memory. 2 weeks after the start of the shoot, the crew officially entered Nassau International Airport for filming. On a runway at the airport, Eric and Nick Frank were discussing the camera positions for the next scene with the special effects artist from the digital domain. This was the scene of the refueling vehicle rushing toward the Heaven's Aero prototype, brushing past a passenger plane that was diving down. This scene was definitely not a real shot. The landing airliner would be fully CG in the post-production. It took Nickel 2 hours to finish shooting the dive shot from the subjective perspective of the pilot. The special effects team would later modify the shot into the interior of the cabin. What they were about to shoot now was the moment when the passenger plane swooped down. A police car was blown up by the terrifying reaction force of the passenger plane's engine. Looking at the police car installed on the pop-up device by the special effects artist, although it had been tested in other places before, it didn't have a direct visual effect for reference. Eric, Nickel, and the special effects team discussed for a while. They couldn't make up their minds. He hoped that one of the cameras could be placed in the path of the police car being thrown out. The effect of the police car rushing toward the camera after being thrown out would be more visually shocking on the big screen. However, this would also easily cause the expensive camera to be destroyed by the flying car. After hesitating for a moment, Eric said, "Stop the shooting for now. Let's pop the car out once to see the effect. Also, get someone to bring over a prop car as backup." The cheapest camera in the crew cost more than $100,000. General Motors, on the other hand, custom-made prop cars for the movie only cost $5,000 on average. Although Eric didn't mind if 1 or 2 cameras were destroyed during the shooting if necessary, it was better to avoid it. Following Eric's decision, the assistant producer in charge of the props left the crowd to prepare the backup car. Eric, Nickel, and the others retreated to a safe position. After the special effects artist confirmed that everything was ready, he pressed the remote control button of the pop-up device. With a muffled sound, everyone nearby felt the ground under their feet tremble slightly. The police car on the pop-up device flew into the air. After it was thrown 7 or 8 meters away, it crashed to the ground. The force of the car didn't decrease after it landed, and it continued to roll forward. When the scene came to a complete stop, the originally good-looking police car had turned into a pile of scrap metal. Various parts were scattered all over the ground. Eric wasn't in the mood to be emotional about this scene. He hurried over with Nickel and the others and saw a shallow pit on the cement ground where the car landed. Recalling the trajectory of the car just now, Eric walked a few steps near the shallow pit. He then stood still and asked the person in charge of the special effects team behind him, "Toby, can you be sure that the trajectory of the car is approximately the same every time it is thrown?" The middle-aged white man named Toby, who was about 40 years old, probably understood Eric's intention. He said, "Although I can't guarantee it, I think the position you are standing at should be relatively safe. We can also adjust the stress point of the car's chassis. This way, the trajectory of the car can be slightly deviated, and the camera position will be safer. No need to deviate. Just install it in the same position as before," Eric decided decisively. He then ordered the departments to prepare for the official shooting. The special effects team began to install a new prop car on the pop-up device. The production crew quickly cleaned up the wreckage of the original car and temporarily repaired the shallow pit that had just been created. Eric and Nickel set up several cameras together. In addition to the camera that was thrown toward the police car's trajectory, there were 2 other cameras that recorded the scene from different angles. It was 40 minutes later when everything was ready. Eric stood in front of the monitor and checked the layout of several cameras for the last time. He then made an OK gesture to the production crew. Casino Royale, Act 54, Scene 7 action. On the side of the cameras, the refueling car and another police jeep moved at the same time. A few seconds later, with a familiar tremor under their feet, the police car on the pop-up device was thrown out again. Eric stared at the most important camera number 3 and saw the car flying toward the camera. Then, the monitor screen suddenly turned black as the tail of the police car approached infinitely. Not far away, the sound of the police car rolling after it landed continued. Nickel, who was standing next to Eric and also watching camera number 3, could not help but blurt out, "Oh my God, my Bonnie." After the monitor screen turned black, Eric had already looked up. Because the shooting at camera number 3 was more dangerous, the cameraman did not personally operate it. He just fixed the camera in the corresponding position. At this time, the camera and its fixed bracket had been broken. It was probably very difficult to repair. In this case, the insurance company would not compensate. Although Eric also felt sorry for the Kodak professional camera that cost $150,000, he looked at Nickel and said, "This camera has a name?" Nickel and Eric walked toward the camera together, wanting to see if there was any room for rescue. Nickel's tone was still sad. "Of course, every camera I have used has a name." "Oh, then I'm sorry. But you should know that the first rule of the apocalypse is not to name anyone or anything around you. It will make you weak." Nickel came to the scene, picked up the camera lens that fell on the ground, and said to Eric, "Don't tell me that the end of the world will often appear on the set of your movies in the future. I will go crazy." The others gradually gathered around. Eric patted Nickel's shoulder to comfort him, and said to the head of the special effects team, Toby, who looked apologetic, "Accidents are inevitable. Everyone, prepare again. I hope that we can successfully complete this set of shots next time." Nickel found the film box on the camera in the mess, checked it, and said, "Eric, although the camera is broken, the film that was just shot should still work." Eric took it and looked at it. There was no damage on the outside of the film box. However, Eric looked at his watch. It was already 2:40 in the morning. Except for the current set of shots, all the planned shots for today had been completed. So he said, "Let's shoot one more. After that, we'll call it a day. Everyone can go back and rest early today." After a burst of cheers, everyone quickly got busy. Although Eric did not adjust the position of the camera, there were no more camera accidents in the following shooting. The results were satisfactory. Although there was still half an hour to 4 o'clock, Eric still called it a day ahead of time. After all, night shooting was very tiring. After arranging the work on the set, Eric took a speedboat back to his residence on Paradise Island. He fell asleep as soon as he lay down on the big bed. He woke up at 12 o'clock sharp. He took a quick shower and changed into a casual t-shirt and trousers. Then he left his residence and walked to the restaurant of the resort. At noon, the sun was shining brightly on Paradise Island. There was no trace of people on the white beach not far from the resort. Although summer was a good time for vacations in the Bahamas, tourists rarely stayed outdoors after 10 o'clock in the morning. Most of the crew members were still resting, but some of the crew members who were on shift showed up at the restaurant on time for lunch. Eric walked through the path of the resort, greeting people from time to time. As soon as he entered the restaurant, Miranda, who was chatting with Ivanka and her daughter, waved at Eric excitedly. After the release of the new issue of Vogue, Giselle quickly became famous in the fashion circle with her outstanding talent. Soon, she received a series of cooperation invitations. Giselle and Alexander left the Bahamas in a hurry a few days after they finished shooting that scene. Only Ivanka, her daughter, and Miranda stayed behind. Eric hadn't seen them for a few days because the filming schedule had been reversed. He guessed that they had gone to other islands in the Bahamas to play. Eric walked over and rubbed Miranda's head. She was wearing a light pink dress. He ordered lunch from the waiter and sat down. He asked Ivana Zelnikova, who was sitting opposite him, "Did you have a good time recently?" "Of course. Thank you for your hospitality, Eric," Ivana Zelnikova said. Then she added, "By the way, Ivanka and I are leaving in the afternoon. I'm here to say goodbye to you." "Why are you in such a hurry? Why don't you stay for a few more days?" Ivana Zelnikova said. "Innie's father called and said that he would take her to Europe for a vacation. I had to send her back in advance." "Oh, that's a pity." Eric looked at Ivanka. "Where are you going to Europe?" "We're going to Europe next month. Maybe we'll meet." Ivanka smiled shyly. "Norway. My father said that he would take us drifting." "Norway." Eric shrugged regretfully. "Then we might not be able to meet them." Ivanka picked at the ice cream in front of her casually. She looked at Eric and whispered, "It's okay, Eric. Next time you come to New York, you can come to my house." Eric could see the hope in the girl's eyes, but he also knew that it was Donald's invitation. He didn't care. He nodded. "Okay. I'll be there when I'm free." Miranda listened obediently to Eric's conversation with Ivanka, but she couldn't hide the envy in her eyes. Ivanka was about the same age as her, but it was only a summer vacation, and she could go almost anywhere on Earth. Also, looking at the pure silver bracelet with diamonds on her wrist, Miranda sighed in her heart. This was a gift from Ivanka a few days ago. It was an ordinary pure silver bracelet. Of course she didn't mind, but this bracelet had a double C logo on it. This was Chanel. Such a bracelet would probably cost more than $1,000. It was said that this was a very ordinary gift for her 12th birthday. Sigh, when can I live like this? Miranda glanced at Eric beside her, and thought with some resentment. Ivanka and her mother's flight was at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Although they were boarding at Nassau International Airport, Eric couldn't spare the time to send them off personally. So after lunch he didn't rush back to his place. Instead, he chatted with them for a while. It was already 2 o'clock in the afternoon when he returned to his place. Miranda followed Eric to his place like a little tail. Eric sat down on the sofa in the living room and turned on the TV. He waited for his assistant to send some documents over. Looking at Miranda, who ran to the refrigerator to get 2 bottles of juice and came over, Eric took a sip of the juice and put it on the coffee table in front of him. "They've all left. You should go back to Los Angeles, right? It's summer vacation now, Eric. And the TV series is done. I don't have anything to do when I go back," Miranda said with a pitiful look on her face. She took off her shoes and curled her 9-month-old legs on the sofa. She rubbed her knees against Eric's legs. "Then go back to Australia. Your parents must miss you a lot." "No, I don't want to go back." Miranda immediately shook her head. Then, she realized that it might be a little inappropriate to say that. It sounded like she didn't miss her parents at all, although it was the truth. After a pause, Miranda quickly added, "It's winter in Australia now. I'm afraid of the cold." "But you can't stay here all the time. Everyone is so busy. There's no reason for you to hang around all the time." Miranda rolled her eyes and reached out to hug Eric's arm. Her small body leaned over and said, "Then Eric, I want to go to Miami and Orlando. I haven't been to Disneyland yet." Both cities were in Florida, which was close to the Bahamas. The airport scene that was being filmed was set at Miami International Airport. However, Eric still frowned slightly and said, "I'm worried about you running around alone. I won't be able to explain it to your parents." "Of course I'm not alone. Claire can accompany me." Eric was puzzled. "Who's Claire?" Miranda pouted unhappily. "Claire is the assistant that the company assigned to me. She came to the Bahamas with me. You've even seen her before. How could you forget?" Eric tried to recall. Only then did he vaguely remember the brown-haired Caucasian woman in her 20s who followed Miranda around a few days ago. Although Miranda was personally arranged by Eric to work at ICM, the girl was not famous after all. ICM could not have assigned her a long-term assistant. Miranda herself could not afford to hire one now. It was probably because of this special situation that ICM specially sent someone to take care of her. Eric thought about it. Just as he was about to say something, the doorbell suddenly rang. After getting rid of Miranda, Eric got up to open the door. His assistant, Peter Ritchie, was standing outside with a stack of documents. "Come in." Eric turned sideways and let Peter Ritchie in. However, as soon as Peter Ritchie walked in, his eyes glanced at the sofa in the living room. His footsteps were obviously a little hesitant. Eric looked over in confusion. A certain little vixen was pretending to be in a hurry to tidy up her pink dress that was not messy at all. There was a faint panic in her eyes, as if she was afraid that others would misunderstand that she and Eric had just done something embarrassing. "Hi, Peter. Good afternoon." Miranda did not forget to greet Peter Ritchie. When Eric had discovered Miranda in Dolly magazine, Peter Ritchie had personally rushed to Brisbane to deal with the matter. "Hi, Miranda." Peter Ritchie greeted with an awkward expression. He did not know if he should leave for the time being. Eric glared at Miranda. He quickly made up his mind to not let the girl stay in the Bahamas. Extreme joy begets sorrow, and extreme boredom begets trouble. Who knew what kind of messy things this little vixen would do? He had been too busy recently and could not find the time to tame this wild and untamed little vixen. "Let's go to the study," Eric said to Peter Ritchie, who was hesitating. Passing by the sofa and looking at Miranda, who was curled up like an obedient kitten, Eric knocked her head casually and said amidst the girl's pained cries, "Call that Claire over. I'll talk to her later." When they came to the study, Eric sat down at the desk. Peter Ritchie handed a few documents to Eric and said, "The box office for the first week of Fatal Island is out. Also, the company's analysis of the box office results of this film." From the first day of Fatal Island, Eric had already known that the box office of this film was suppressed by Eddie Murphy's black comedy, The Fat Professor. At first, Eric suspected that John Woo had once again encountered the curse of his previous life, and that his luck in Hollywood had been exhausted after the success of several films. However, looking at the weekend box office data in his hand, Eric realized that this was not the case. In the 3-day weekend box office rankings, The Fat Professor took first place with $30.13 million in box office, but Fatal Island followed by Fatal Island with $28.38 million. The third place, The Matrix, experienced a 37% drop in box office due to the release of several new films, reaching $25.76 million. From this data, it could be seen that although the box office of Fatal Island was at a disadvantage, the box office difference between Fatal Island and The Fat Professor was only a little more than $1 million. Firefly's distribution department predicted that the box office of Fatal Island should be around $42 million in the first week. Looking at the box office data in his hand, Eric asked Peter Ritchie, "I remember that Fatal Island had a very good reputation during the test screening stage, right?" "Yes, Fatal Island had a comprehensive rating of around 7.5 from various media outlets. In the audience survey we arranged, it also had a very good reputation. But The Fat Professor only had a rating of 5.6. Peter Ritchie did not comment too much on The Fat Professor. After all, a box office loss was a loss. He continued, "The distribution department has already made a corresponding assessment of why the box office of Fatal Island is not as good as The Fat Professor. The information is at the bottom." Eric found the information and looked up to see that Peter Ritchie was still standing respectfully across the desk. He glanced around and did not find a second chair. He gestured to the sofa diagonally opposite him and said, "You sit down first, I'll finish reading." Peter Ritchie nodded and took a few steps back to sit on the sofa. Eric opened the information. It turned out that it was the Firefly Distribution Department's statistics on the age distribution of the audience for Fatal Island. At the same time, there was a detailed comparison with John Woo's previous films and the summer movies of the same period. After reading these statistics, Eric roughly understood why the box office of Fatal Island was relatively mediocre. The key reason why the summer was popular was that a large number of young people went to the cinema during the holidays. According to statistics, students under the age of 22 contributed 40% of the box office to the annual summer box office data. It was this extra demand, coupled with the stimulation of the movie market by a large number of high-quality movies during the summer, that resulted in the average box office of the summer season being 2 to 3 times more than other unpopular seasons. Because of this, the box office success of a movie in the summer largely depended on whether it was liked by young people. And this was precisely the shortcoming of Brave Life Seizing Island. Although the two male protagonists of Fatal Island, Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage, were A-list Hollywood stars, the two old men were not that attractive to young people. There was also another kind of female lead in the film that was very attractive to young people. On the other hand, Fatal Island explored the serious theme of the unfair treatment of retired soldiers by the UA government. It did not have the thrilling and eye-catching scenes of blockbusters such as the Mission Impossible series. Therefore, these unfavorable factors created the main reason that although Fatal Island had a good reputation, it was not attractive to young people. In the comparative data, only 17% of the audience of Fatal Island was under the age of 22. This proportion was even far lower than The Matrix, which was rated as R-rated. The proportion of The Matrix in this audience range reached 35%. At the same time, the proportion of audiences for Fatal Island was also lower than Mr. and Mrs. Smith and other films directed by John Woo. Even so, Fatal Island was definitely not a failure. The Firefly distribution department estimated the box office to be $130 million in North America and $200 million overseas, based on the word-of-mouth and box office data after the release. Compared to the production cost of $75 million, Firefly could roughly recoup its cost in the box office. So we still lost in the end, so. After reading the information, Eric looked up at Peter Ritchie and asked, "Now, what is the reaction from Hollywood?" Chapter 798. Peter Ritchie thought for a while and said, "There aren't many other Hollywood studios that have made a public statement on this. But Universal has already said this morning that they will hold a celebration party for The Fat Professor this weekend. In addition, the media is very active on this matter. After all, this is the first time in 3 years that we have lost control of the June slot. Starting from 1993's Jurassic Park, Firefly relied on a fixed strategy of releasing 3 films during the summer to firmly dominate the hottest month of June in North America. During this period, the films produced by other film companies almost never won any weekly box office title. Because of the continuous strong box office performance of Firefly's summer films, Hollywood had even regarded the June slot as Firefly's private territory. The other major studios would almost subconsciously transfer their own films out of the June slot. However, this year, because Titanic and Firefly's 3D animated films were both absent from the summer schedule, Firefly only had 2 films focused on releasing. Universal, Paramount, and other film companies had also begun to try to snatch the primetime slot that originally belonged to Firefly. Although Firefly was absent from one film, the strength of Firefly in the past few years still left a deep shadow in the hearts of other studios. Therefore, it was conceivable that when Universal's black comedy, The Fat Professor, unexpectedly suppressed Firefly's Fatal Island and won the weekly box office title, the mood of the other major Hollywood studio executives would be jubilant. Although they would not rush to make a public statement, with the close relationship between Hollywood and the media, these people would definitely vent the depression accumulated in the past few years through media channels. With the media's habit of taking advantage of the situation, Eric could almost imagine how lively the entertainment news in the UA newspapers would be in recent days. Eric was not particularly concerned about this, just like the conversation between Katzenberg and Frank Wells a few days ago in Los Angeles. On the one hand, Firefly was not a listed company, and Eric had absolute control of the company, so he did not have to worry about pressure from the capital market and shareholders. On the other hand, with its own strong financial strength, The Firefly film production and distribution systems capital chain was completely self-sufficient and did not need to rely on external financing. Therefore, this kind of situation where the box office did not meet expectations would not have any substantial impact on Firefly. At most, the annual film business revenue would shrink compared to the past. With the extreme uncertainty of the film market, this kind of performance fluctuation was almost inevitable for any major film company. At this time, it was not entirely a bad thing for Firefly. At least, it could let the Hollywood peers who had been suppressed for several years breathe a sigh of relief and reduce some of their hostility and wariness toward Firefly. After talking with Peter Ritchie for a while, Eric signed a few necessary documents and sent his assistant away. Leaving the study and going downstairs to the living room, Miranda saw Eric coming downstairs and immediately got up to greet him. A white woman who was sitting on the single sofa next to her also stood up. The woman was wearing a woman's blouse and a black knee-length skirt. She was about 1.7 meters tall and had brown hair. Her appearance was average, but there was a faint shrewdness in her eyes. "Eric, this is Claire Weitzman," Miranda introduced as she held Eric's arm intimately. Eric nodded and gestured for her to sit down again. He asked, "You're an intern at ICM, right?" "Yes, Mr. Williams. I dropped out of USC last year and just entered ICM for a year. Nearly 50% of American college students dropped out halfway." Eric was not surprised that Claire was honest. He guessed that she might be the daughter of an ICM executive from the school she studied at. USC was a famous school for the children of the rich in North America. It was definitely not a pure coincidence that Claire was sent to be Miranda's assistant. After all, the ICM executives must know that through Miranda, they could get the opportunity to contact him. This was probably a resource that any agent dreamed of. Eric was too lazy to care about the twists and turns. He said, "Miranda has nothing to do here. Accompany her to Florida, and then return to Los Angeles." Claire smiled and nodded. "Of course, Mr. Williams. This is my job." Miranda, who was next to Eric, had a happy expression on her face. However, it quickly turned into a pitiful expression. She gently shook Eric's arm and said, "Eric, I can't even afford a plane ticket back to Los Angeles now." Eric smiled and reached out to pinch the girl's pitiful face. He took out his wallet and wanted to write a check for the girl. However, Miranda had already leaned over like a curious kitten and peeked into Eric's wallet. "Well, this black. I've heard of it before. Eric, can I use this black credit card?" Although the famous American Express Black Gold Card was only released in 1999, in fact, many banks' top credit cards were black. Eric was not a collector. There were only 3 or 4 credit cards from major American banks in his wallet. Seeing the girl's tempted expression, Eric smiled and inserted the pen back. He took out the black Citigroup card and handed it to the girl. "Here, don't spend it. Play for a while, and then go back to Los Angeles obediently." "I know." Miranda took the credit card with a joyful expression and kissed it with her pink lips. Realizing that it was inappropriate, she hurriedly hugged Eric's neck and kissed him on the cheek. "Eric, you're such a good person." Eric was speechless. He did not expect that his unlimited black card would be exchanged for a good person card. What a loss. He reached out and carried Miranda, who was almost riding on his lap, away. Eric said, "Go find Peter. Ask him to call my accountant and authorize it. Also, don't praise people like this in the future." After getting rid of the annoying little minx, Eric continued to work on Casino Royale. However, in Hollywood, the media discussion caused by the box office failure of Fatal Island did not fade away because of the passage of time. Instead, it became the beginning of a storm. After the news that the box office of Fatal Island lost to Fat Professor in the first weekend came out, most of the media in North America was in an uproar. Although they also realized that this kind of celebration was very unreasonable, the news of Firefly's first box office failure, after occupying the June slot for 3 years, was still big news after all. It was even more attractive to ordinary people than the news of a large financial group in the United States suddenly going bankrupt. Therefore, whether it was to attract attention or the forces behind it really wanted to celebrate, in short, Most of the media showed a gloating attitude towards the news of the box office failure of Fatal Island. The uproar lasted for a week. On June 21st, The Mummy 2, a blockbuster film produced by Universal for 2 years, was officially released on more than 3,300 screens in the United States. At the same time, Ace Commissioner, which was produced by Sony and starred Jim Carrey, was also released. Relying on the accumulated popularity and overwhelming publicity of its predecessor, The Mummy 2 had a strong momentum. In just 1 week, it harvested $84.29 million in box office in North America, easily becoming the box office champion of the week. At the same time, it also achieved the best result of any film released in 1996 so far. At the same time, just as Firefly had predicted, although there were not many young people in the audience, due to the high quality of the film, the box office only dropped by 23% the next week. Once again, the film earned $32.17 million at the box office, ranking second on the weekly box office rankings. Sony's Ace Commissioner, which was highly anticipated by Sony, had a box office far lower than industry expectations. In its first week, it only earned $29.96 million in the box office on more than 2,600 screens, ranking third. Because Jim Carrey's $20 million salary significantly increased the film's production budget, the total cost of the film reached $60 million. However, based on the poor reviews of the film, Jim Carrey's first film after he was released from his original contract might also be the first film that failed to exceed $100 million in the North American box office after he was cast as the male lead. As expected, Fat Professor also fell by 39% in the box office. The weekly box office was $27.45 million, ranking fourth. In its fourth week, the box office of The Matrix dropped by 46%, squeezing into the fifth place with a weekly box office of $20.08 million. At the same time, after 4 weeks of screening, the North American box office of The Matrix easily exceeded $200 million, reaching $2,054 million. Because of the congenital weakness of Fatal Island, although it performed well the next week and surpassed Fat Professor, the total box office of this film would only be around $130 million. Therefore, although the box office of The Matrix exceeded $200 million, the media still did not let go of the opportunity to ridicule Firefly. Instead, they compared Firefly's box office results this year with last year's. Firefly's 3 summer releases last year, Jurassic Park 2, Lone Ranger Day, and Toy Story 2, had a total of more than $811 million in the North American box office alone. A few years ago, Firefly's summer box office remained at this level, but this year, everything seemed to have taken a turn for the worse. Although the box office of The Matrix exceeded $200 million, the expected box office of Fatal Island was destined to bring in a good profit for Firefly in the later stages. However, based on the North American box office data of The Matrix, which was expected to gross $240 million, and Fatal Island, which was expected to gross $130 million, the total box office of these 2 films this summer was only $370 million. Compared to last year's $811 million summer box office results, Firefly's summer box office results this year had dropped by 54%. Heavyweight films always had a locomotive effect in major film companies. Because of the lack of momentum of The Matrix and Fatal Island, it was conceivable that in the next year, Firefly's various profit figures would shrink by more than 50% compared to last year. Coupled with the expected loss of Titanic, which was almost following in the footsteps of future Waterworld, it was completely unknown whether Firefly could achieve an annual operating profit of more than $2 billion this year like last year. Some media outlets that were more pessimistic about Firefly even took Firefly's summer box office failure as a sign that Firefly was bound to decline. In this case, in the last week of June, Paramount's Stranger in the Wind once again gave Firefly a perfect blow. On June 28, the Disney hand-drawn animation studio that Paramount Pictures acquired from Firefly for $2.5 billion, which was now known as Paramount Animation, launched its first 2D hand-drawn animation film, Stranger in the Wind. Although the production cost of this 2D animated film had almost doubled compared to the time of Firefly, because Paramount Animation was bent on perfect revenge for their old boss. Several studio heads had invested a lot of energy in this animated film. The quality of Stranger in the Wind was much better than in the original Spacetime. The film's early screening box office had accumulated to $5.9 million. Although Stranger in the Wind failed to replicate the box office miracle of The Lion King's $66 million in the first week, it's $51 million in the first week, and a total of $56.9 million in the box office still exceeded the expectations of most box office agencies. It even overshadowed The Mummy 2, which was extremely strong in its first week. The Mummy 2's box office fell by 49% this week, earning only $41.72 million. As everyone knew, the box office curve of animated films had always been good at the long term. Stranger in the Wind box office reached $51 million in the first week. As long as the box office declined within 30% in the next few weeks, the total box office could even hit the $200 million mark. Later, the 26% box office decline of Stranger in the Wind in the next week undoubtedly confirmed this point. In this case, everyone completely ignored Final Destination, which was released in the same week as Stranger in the Wind by Firefly's New Line Cinema. This unconventional bloody horror film earned more than $13 million in the first week of the summer, when there were plenty of strong competitors. The next week's drop was only 24%, and the total box office in the next few weeks could even approach $60 million. With a $20 million production cost, plus the overseas box office, Final Destination was undoubtedly another profitable film for New Line Cinema this year after Seven Deadly Sins. Of course, most of the media selectively ignored this. Because of the box office success of Stranger in the Wind, the media began to shift their focus to Firefly's abandonment of hand-drawn animation. Only a few people knew the inside story of Firefly selling the hand-drawn animation studio, and of course, Firefly couldn't explain it at this time. Seeing that the outside world was getting more and more lively, the company had to start a counterattack. It just so happened that the box office of The Matrix exceeded $200 million, which was worth celebrating. In order to make this film achieve a higher box office in North America, Firefly arranged for the Wachowski brothers to appear on ABC's talk show. But this talk show really brought Firefly a lot of trouble. Chapter 799. In July, The Breakin' Beauties 2 was released on July 5 to much anticipation. As the most popular female action movie in recent years, The Breakin' Beauties 2 grossed more than $71 million in box office in its first week. At the same time, Stranger of the Wind, The Mummy 2, and other films continued to reap the box office in the North American film market. The two sequels to Men in Black and Game of Bravehearts were also ready to be released in the next few weeks. In many people's opinion, other than the Mummy series, whether it was Paramount Animation's Stranger of the Wind, MGM's The Breakin' Girls, or Sony Pictures' Men in Black and Game of Bravehearts, they should have all been in Firefly's pocket. However, at this time, these films were all occupied by the other major film companies. Firefly's The Matrix and Deadly Island this year had begun to come to an end. Therefore, almost all of these factors became the reason why the media ridiculed Firefly's business strategy, especially Paramount Animation Studio. Although Firefly sold the hand-drawn animation studio for a whopping $2.5 billion, judging from the current commercial potential of Stranger of the Wind, as long as Paramount Animation maintained the same production standards in the next few animated films, Viacom could not only recoup all of its investment in the next 10 years, but with the cooperation of Paramount Animation, Nickelodeon, Blockbuster, and other companies in the Viacom system, Viacom could also create a 2D animation industry chain that could compete with Firefly's 3D animated films. This was the most fatal impact on Firefly. Before this, due to the difficulty of developing an animated film team and the long investment cycle, the Hollywood animated film industry was almost monopolized by Disney, which was owned by Firefly. It could be said that Firefly took the initiative to cut a large piece of the high-profit industry that they originally monopolized and gave it to Viacom. Only a small number of people knew the inside story of the sale of Disney's hand-drawn animation studio, so Firefly had no way to refute it. Moreover, if it was just these comments criticizing Firefly, although it was annoying, it would not cause any substantial damage to Firefly. The Public Relations Department estimated that the media would make a ruckus for a while, and when the summer was over, the public would no longer be interested in these things, and the topic would naturally cool down. However, after the box office of The Matrix, in North America exceeded $200 million, the Wachowskis appeared on ABC's Late Show with David. The brothers had logged on to the talk show mainly to promote the post-production of The Matrix. They hoped that the movie's box office would last longer in the next few weeks. Although the two of them were already famous, they were the kind of people who liked to keep a low profile. It was Frank Wales who personally called the two of them to arrange this talk show. However, during the interview, the Wachowskis accidentally mentioned that the script for the movie had been rejected by the company, and that they were rewriting the script. Firefly didn't show much sensitivity to this topic. But perhaps it was because news about fireflies often made headlines recently, and a large number of media people had their eyes fixed on the people and things related to fireflies recently. Naturally, this news was noticed by people who were observant. After the Wachowskis finished the interview, they had just returned to Chicago where they lived for a long time when a paparazzi who had been waiting for them for a long time pestered the brothers. After a few days of pestering, and because Andy Wachowskis had just come out of the bar and had just drunk some wine, the paparazzi finally tricked him into bringing him back to the bar again for an exclusive interview. Although the concept of the original novel that Eric had released in advance was referenced, the brothers had always treated the script of the trilogy as their own painstaking effort. Ever since the script was completely rejected by Eric, the brothers had been quite depressed recently. Andy Wachowskis was in a daze as he poured out a lot of grievances to the excited paparazzi. So the next day, the most influential newspaper in Chicago, the Chicago Sun, published a related article. The Matrix is undoubtedly the best sci-fi film in recent years. Although it was changed from Eric Williams' original novel, the directors and screenwriters, the Wachowskis, added a lot of more philosophical elements to the film. This also made the film a further sublimation of the theme on the basis of Eric Williams' original novel, greatly increasing the film's viewability and cultural connotation. However, according to the interview with the director of The Matrix, Andy Wachowskis, by our special correspondent, Bob Johns, we received extremely regrettable news. In the process of adapting Eric Williams' original novel, the Wachowskis had conceived a complete trilogy series from the beginning, but after the success of the first part, the scripts for the next two parts were completely rejected by the senior management of Firefly. Andy Wachowskis revealed that the senior management of Firefly thought that the sequel script was too deep and did not meet the requirements of a commercial film. Therefore, not only did Firefly reject the Wachowskis' request for the two sequels to be made together, but they also asked the brothers to completely rewrite the script, remove the deep philosophical connotation, and return to the essence of a commercial film. As we all know, although this year Firefly suffered its first film performance failure since its establishment, we have to admit that Firefly Group has achieved commercial results in the film business in recent years that are enough to make all the other competitors look up to it. But at the same time, we also see that Firefly has done almost nothing in the field of artistic films outside of commercial films in recent years. We have always believed that while a film pursues commercial profits, it also shoulders the obligation to convey some spiritual meaning. Therefore, Firefly's excessive pursuit of commercial and abandoning of spiritual meaning is undoubtedly very undesirable. Let's not talk about anything else. Take The Matrix, for example. In just over a month after its release, this film was widely praised because of the perfect combination of science fiction and philosophy. It quickly gathered a large number of die-hard fans. It can be imagined that once the sequel of The Matrix completely abandons the distinct personal characteristics of the Wachowskis and returns to the essence of Firefly's popcorn commercial film, then, after waiting for a few years with great anticipation, there is no doubt that what awaits us again will be incomparable disappointment. It was clear that the report had misinterpreted Andy Wachowski's words to a great extent. Eric's original request was only for the brothers to rewrite a complete and smooth story. He did not ask them to give up their personal style. On the day the Chicago Sun published this article, the Wachowskis' agent publicly clarified to the media that Firefly had no intention of asking the brothers to adapt The Matrix into a pure popcorn movie. This interview was just the result of the words of the drunk Andy Wachowskis by the paparazzi named Bob Johns. However, the media and fans obviously did not believe the clarification of the Wachowskis' agent. Some people who thought they knew the internal rules of the industry even concluded that this was a statement that the Wachowskis had to make under the strong pressure of Firefly. Therefore, this article was quickly reposted in just a few days, and its influence increased. In less than a week, almost all Americans who paid attention to entertainment news knew about this incident. The real fans of The Matrix were even more furious. By the second week of the incident, a large number of fans had started to gather at the Firefly headquarters in Burbank and outside Firefly Studios in Playa Vista. They held up signs that said, "We don't want a popcorn movie, we want The Matrix," and demanded that Firefly's management give up on the decision to let the Wachowskis change the script and follow the original script. If it was just the media's various attacks and ridicule, Firefly could of course ignore it. However, the company had to treat the actions of the fans seriously. After all, the perfect film culture in the United States also meant that the power of the fan community was far greater than that of other countries where the film industry had just started to develop. If it was not handled properly, Firefly's brand could be damaged. Every day, while specially arranging for people to maintain order among the original fans to prevent more serious emergencies, Firefly's management also began to discuss countermeasures. Shooting according to the Wachowskis' original script was definitely not going to work, because Firefly was now completely squeezed into a situation where they had to advance and retreat for 2 years. Once the confusing script of the original version was released, the quality of the film would definitely not meet the expectations of the fans. By then, because of what happened today, the disappointed fans would definitely blame the Fireflies for everything that had happened today. Furthermore, it was impossible for Firefly to release the original version of the Wachowskis' script to the public. Not only would that go against the industry's rules, but fans who believed that everything about their idols was good would also not make professional judgments about the script. On the other hand, if they followed the original plan and let the Wachowskis rewrite the script, not to mention how the film would turn out in the future, in the case of offending a large number of fans, this group of people would definitely be more critical of the sequel. When that time came, even if the sequel had the potential to be 8 out of 10, it would be dragged down to 6 out of 10 by the picky fans. All in all, because of this unexpected media storm, no matter what Firefly did regarding the Matrix project, as long as the quality of the sequel did not reach an amazing level, the future results would almost always be wrong. Perhaps the other competitors also realized that Firefly was in a dilemma. Even if they could not ruin the Matrix, they still wanted to ruin it, so they all started to make small moves. As time passed, the news related to the sequel of The Matrix not only did not cool down, but it also became more and more popular. There was even a website on the internet asking for the original, with the same title. "We don't want a popcorn movie, we want The Matrix." In just a week, it attracted more than 100,000 signatures. The senior management of Firefly Corporation went through many public relations efforts, and Katzenberg even personally went on ABC's Morning News to explain Firefly's intentions to the fans. In the end, it was all to no avail. Although there were other ways to deal with it, in the end, Katzenberg, Frank Wales, and the other senior management could only send the matter to Eric in the Bahamas and let him make the decision himself. After 2 weeks of night shooting, the relevant dialogue scenes also went quite smoothly. It was July 16th. 2 days ago, all the scenes of Casino Royale in the Bahamas had been completed. However, because of a month and a half of continuous work, plus 2 weeks of torturous day and night shooting in the middle, the entire crew was exhausted. Eric was not in a hurry to get the crew to the next filming location. Instead, he gave the entire crew 3 days off so that everyone could enjoy the sunshine and beaches of the Bahamas. While the film was being shot, of course, Eric also kept an eye on the series of events in Los Angeles. He thought that Katzenberg and the others would handle the matter properly, but when his first assistant, Kelly Haynes, personally came to the Bahamas with a stack of documents, Eric realized that things had developed to the point of being on the verge of getting out of control. On the sofa in the living room of Eric's residence, Kelly handed a document to Eric and explained, "The current situation is that we are almost completely unable to give the fans a satisfactory explanation. If we shoot according to the original script, if the quality of the film does not meet expectations in the future, the fault will definitely be blamed on us. If we let the Wachowskis rewrite the script, the film may be boycotted by the fans before the film is even shot. We will still have to bear the blame." Eric finished reading a large pile of clippings, risk assessments, and other information. He could not help but rub his temples and say, "They really don't let us rest at all. Now we can't even stop shooting." Kelly smiled bitterly and said, "Yes, if the project is shelved, we will still offend the fans, and it may be the worst kind of offense, because they will feel that they are neglected and looked down upon." "Okay, let me think about it." Eric rubbed his temples and looked at Peter Ritchie sitting on the other side. He said, "Go find a place where we can have a video conference. There should be one in the Ocean Club Center, right? Let Katzenberg and the others come online on time tonight, and we can discuss it again." Peter Ritchie nodded and hesitated. He said, "Eric, the video conference may be a little difficult. There shouldn't be any video conference equipment here. It will be easier to arrange a telephone conference room." Eric had also forgotten that the development of the internet had not yet reached the level where video conferences could be easily held. Moreover, this was the Bahamas. He waved his hand and said, "Then let's have a telephone conference." After Peter Ritchie left, Kelly moved her slender body. Seeing that Eric was still rubbing his temples, she gently got up and walked over. She stood behind Eric and reached out her hands to massage Eric's temples. Chapter 800. Eric felt Kelly's cold fingertips, and he put down his hand and leaned back comfortably on the sofa. "Do you have a headache? Are you too tired recently?" Kelly's voice sounded behind him. She was not as smart as a female assistant, but she sounded more gentle. "The doctor said it's the result of the day and night reversal. I will be fine after a while." Eric leaned back and replied. He then asked, "Sony, the box office for Men in Black 2 should be out by now, right?" Kelly replied, 52, $16 million US. The box office should be around $75 million US in the first week. Eric nodded. There wasn't much of a change in his emotions. Firefly still held 60% of the investment shares for Game of the Brave 2, which was going to be released next week. However, since the last dispute, Firefly had completely let go of these two projects according to the established strategy, except for the investment. The box office of $75 million US in the first week might seem good, and the total box office in North America might even hit $200 million US. But because Sony did not control the cost of production and increased the salaries of the lead actors, the production cost of this sequel was as high as $140 million US. Including marketing, the total cost was close to $200 million US. Even if the global box office could reach $600 million US, this project could barely recoup its investment. Although the subsequent DVDs, videotapes, and broadcast rights would still be profitable, if the long-term operation cost was included, such a project was actually not worth it. After a while, Eric asked again, "What about Games of Brave 2? I heard the pre-screening was not very good?" "Yes." Kelly did not want Eric to worry, but since he asked, she said, "During the screening, many critics said that this sequel was a farce. Not only was the plot messy, but it also lost the comedic style of the first film. However, most of these comments were suppressed by Sony. Now, we just have to see how the market responds next week. After all, the special effects of the film are still very good." Eric did not participate in the production of the sequel. Brave Game 2-inch was still in the style of a chessboard, but the production team was completely changed. Even the director was changed to someone else. In addition, the first movie did not garner much popularity, so it was not surprising that it had such an ending. Of course, replacing the entire production team was not without its benefits. At the very least, the production cost of this sequel was maintained at an acceptable US $86 million. Even if it was a loss, Firefly would not lose too much. After the summer break, among the few movies that Firefly and Sony had worked on, only Men in Black had the possibility of developing a sequel. Apart from the Game of Bravehearts series, the original Mr. and Mrs. Smith series had been in talks for a sequel, but everyone knew that it would be very difficult for Pierce Brosnan, the 007 actor, to return. Nicole's salary in the past few years had exceeded Pierce Brosnan's, and she was busy with too many film contracts. The possibility of a sequel to Mr. and Mrs. Smith was almost zero. Thinking about Sony's Godzilla, Eric could not help but smile. Maybe for a long time in the future, Sony would be a flop. Kelly saw Eric did not reply, so she leaned over and noticed his smile. She asked, "What are you smiling about?" Eric shook his head and patted the seat beside him. "Come sit here." Kelly knew this man was up to no good, so she sat down beside him. But she still reminded him softly, "It is daytime now. Peter might come over later." "Then call him and tell him not to come over." Eric smiled and lay down on the woman's plump thighs. He sniffed her alluring body fragrance and hugged the woman's waist. "I'm going to sleep for a while. Don't let anyone disturb me even if the sky falls." Kelly had no choice. She reached for her phone on the coffee table and called Peter Ritchie. She gave him some vague instructions in a low voice before hanging up. She looked down and saw that Eric, who was resting on her lap, had closed his eyes comfortably. His breathing had begun to calm down. When he woke up again, the whole living room was dark. There was a light yellow wall lamp on the wall, and Kelly's lap had become a pillow. Eric pulled the blanket off his body and sat up. He habitually raised his wrist, and found that his watch had been taken off and placed on the coffee table. It was almost 8 o'clock in the evening. Eric was about to pick up his phone to call Kelly when the door was pushed open, and Kelly walked in with a tray. "Eric, you are awake?" Kelly put down the tray and walked over. She reached out and touched his forehead. Eric grabbed her hand and kissed it. "Why did you leave me here alone?" "I went to prepare dinner for you." Kelly smiled and pulled her hand back. "The meeting room is ready. You should eat something first. Everyone is waiting for you." "Then let's go directly." Eric was about to get up but was stopped by Kelly. "It's okay. Everyone knows that you have been tired recently." After a quick and simple dinner, Eric rushed to a meeting room in the center of the Ocean Club at 8:30. Peter Ritchie was already waiting there. As expected, there was still no video conference equipment. There was a conference phone on the long table. Eric sat down on the chair. Kelly spread out a few documents in front of him and sat down beside him. She said into the conference phone, "Everyone, Eric is here." "Good evening." Eric also greeted. On the other end of the line came the greetings of Carson Berg, Frank Wells, and other Firefly executives. After a few simple greetings, Eric said, "Then let's talk about the situation now. Are there still fans outside the headquarters?" Carson Berg smiled bitterly and replied, "Yes, there have been quite a lot of people recently. Burbank and Praia Vista both have more than 100 people. Also, the number of people who signed the invitation on the original website has exceeded 120,000. The current internet system was not perfect, let alone the real name system." Eric knew very well that the 120,000 people were not real. Other than the deliberate interference of competitors, most people might have clicked on it repeatedly. Therefore, he did not care too much about the data. He said, "Then in this situation, everyone, let's talk about your thoughts first. I feel that, no matter what, we should give the public an accurate answer as soon as possible to put an end to this." Frank Wells' voice came over. "Therefore, I suggest that we continue to film according to the original script of the Wachowski brothers. Of course, we can only film the second part. I believe that with the accumulated popularity of the first part, the profits this sequel will bring us is only a matter of time. Even if the quality of the film is not satisfactory, the current situation will not happen again. That's a good way to handle it." Eric nodded and asked, "Jeffrey, what do you think?" Carson Berg and the others seemed to have reached a consensus. They said, "Eric, We've all read the script of the Wachowski brothers. Everyone knows that filming like this will be a disaster for the series. However, we don't have any other good ways to handle it now. What Frank said is pretty much the best solution." Eric smiled bitterly and said, "In that case, this series is pretty much useless to us." "Useless?" A puzzled voice came from the conference phone. Eric realized that no one would know this joke, so he explained in English that the other party could understand. "It's tasteless, but it's a pity to abandon it." "That's quite accurate," Frank Wells said. "However, it can't be said to be useless. No matter what, with the current popularity of the film, the sequel will definitely be profitable." Eric could not help but rub his temples again. In fact, even without this, Eric did not have 100% confidence in the revised script of the Wachowski brothers. It was very difficult to change a director's style. Even if the brothers wrote a new script, during filming, unless Firefly sent someone to watch every scene closely, it would be impossible to prevent the brothers from going their own way. Moreover, Firefly's strategy of sending people to watch the set could not be realized at all, because this kind of excessive interference with the director would often only lead to disastrous results. As far as Eric knew, the Wachowskis were definitely hot-tempered. During the filming of the first movie, as newcomers, the two brothers could still maintain their modesty and restraint, but now that they were already famous, it was impossible for them to continue to be obedient. After thinking for a while, Eric looked up and asked, "Now how much is the box office of the film?" The other party did not answer for a while. Kelly, who was sitting next to Eric, said, $223.5 million in North America, $136 million overseas, and there are still a few major markets like France, Japan, and Italy that haven't been released yet. When the film is released in these countries, the overseas box office is estimated to be between $350 million to $400 million, and the total global box office should be around $600 million. With the signing of trade agreements such as the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade led by the United States in recent years, most of the overseas film markets had been further opened, and the corresponding share of the overseas box office had begun to increase. The overall share of the overseas box office of Hollywood films had increased to about 35%. According to the average share of the domestic and overseas box office in the United States, Firefly could roughly recoup $250 million out of a total box office of $600 million. According to the proportion of the box office of a movie's total revenue, the future profits from the long-term peripheral operations would be about twice this figure. Excluding the various costs, Firefly could at least earn about $500 million from this project. Of course, Firefly could recoup almost all of the box office earnings within a year, but the subsequent DVD and videotape distribution, peripheral copyright operations, and other income would require more than 3 years of long-term operations. This was also the reason why the current second- and third-tier Hollywood film companies could only focus on the box office earnings. Only Hollywood's Big Seven could sustain a capital operations cycle of more than 3 years. For second- and third-tier film companies, if the development of a movie could not recoup funds quickly from the box office, then a series of problems such as a broken capital chain and stagnation of the company's development would come one after another. In Eric's memory, the 2 sequels to The Matrix had a cumulative global box office of nearly $1.2 billion, and Time Warner could roughly recoup $500 million of box office earnings. However, the production cost of the 2 sequels was $300 million, and the publicity cost was at least $100 million. In other words, although the global box office of $1.2 billion was enviable, in reality, Time Warner could only earn a mere $100 million profit from the 2 sequels. Moreover, because the reputation and quality of the 2 sequels had seriously declined, the DVD and other income in the later stages would not be very good. Although Eric did not know the specific figures, he was certain that the profits of the 2 sequels combined would not necessarily be as much as the first film, which had a great reputation and great influence. After thinking for a while, Eric said, "What do you think about selling the production rights to the sequel to The Matrix?" "No. How can we do that? Eric, you're crazy. A series of objections immediately came from the other side, and Kelly and Peter also looked at Eric in surprise. Although they were facing a lot of trouble now, none of the senior management of Firefly had ever thought of this. There were countless examples of Hollywood film companies exchanging or selling copyrights to each other for various reasons, but those were basically projects that were in the development stage and had an uncertain future. The Matrix was different. The first film in the series could bring in a net profit of no less than $500 million for the company. Everyone felt that it was crazy to want to sell such a project. After everyone calmed down a little, Carson said, "Eric, we must not sell The Matrix. Let's not talk about other things. You must have heard some of the news during this period. We've already given up enough projects." Eric said patiently, "I think that everyone may be too sensitive recently. Our share of the box office this summer was not ideal, but this is definitely only temporary. Every film company will experience a low point, and what's more, our low point is even worse than some film companies at their peak. Think about it carefully. So far, we've already had 3 films that broke $100 million in box office this year: Seven Deadly Sins, The Matrix, and Fatal Island. There's also The Red Zone and the recently released Final Destination. These films have also done very well at the box office. So overall, our situation is still better than most film companies." Frank Whale's gentle voice came from the conference call, and he advised, "Eric, but we have to think about the future. The Matrix is such an iconic project. How can we sell it?" "In the future," Eric said patiently, "we won't be lacking projects in the future. Although we've experienced a hiatus this year, next year, Disney Animation and Pixar Animation will be able to release 2 3D animated films, Monster Power Company and Finding Nemo. After next year, the 2 animation companies will be able to maintain the pace of 1 animated film per year on average. In addition, we have projects like Jurassic Park 3 and The Day After Tomorrow. These are enough to maintain the company's strong position in live-action films. What's more, the company will definitely continue to develop other high-quality copyrights in the future." Chapter 801. Although it was difficult for Katzenberg and Frank Wills to approve of Eric's plan to sell The Matrix, they had to admit that in the current situation, getting rid of the project and cashing out in advance was a solution. Since the boss had made up his mind, Katzenberg began to discuss the best solution. "Then, I'll release the news tomorrow. At least it can divert the media and the public's attention." Frank Wills also said, "That's not a bad idea. If we drag it to the end and can't find a suitable buyer, it's best not to sell." Frank Wills was obviously still a little unwilling. Eric did not want to appear too stubborn, so he nodded in agreement. After discussing some more details, they ended the topic. Katzenberg said again, "Eric, Cameron can release the director's version of Titanic at the end of the month. I've seen some samples. This version may be more than 3 hours long. I've talked to Cameron and hoped that he could shorten the film to 150 minutes, but Cameron insisted that you see the sample in person before making a decision." Katzenberg's tone was full of helplessness. Obviously, the confrontation between the two was not as simple as he made it out to be. Eric thought about it. The shooting cycle of Casino Royale was a total of 5 months. According to the schedule, the next stop was the Czech Republic. The shooting time was 2 weeks. Then the shooting in Italy would last a month. The crew would finally shoot in the United Kingdom for the last 2 months. At the same time, they would do some post-production work at the famous Pine Forest studio in London. After thinking for a moment, Eric turned to ask Kelly next to him, "When is the Venice Film Festival this year?" Kelly said, "August 28th. Eric nodded and said into the conference phone, "I don't know if it's too late. If possible, let Titanic participate in this year's Venice Film Festival. It doesn't matter if it participates in the competition or not. It's best if it can be used as the opening film. Also, I happen to be in Italy next month. Ask Jim to bring the sample to Europe in advance. I'll take a look first." Katzenberg said, "Okay, Eric, we'll do our best." Firefly Group's work efficiency was still very high. The next day, The Los Angeles Times reported that Firefly might sell the production rights of The Matrix. Later, Katzenberg, who was surrounded by reporters at the entrance of Firefly Group's headquarters, personally confirmed the news. For a moment, from the media to the fans, everyone was in a state of confusion, not knowing what had happened. The other major film companies in Hollywood were even more surprised. They did play a lot of tricks in this matter. These people just wanted to create some trouble for Firefly in this project from the beginning to the end. No one thought that Firefly would quit without a word. Moreover, from the beginning, Firefly had already prepared a public relations plan for Yulun. However, as soon as the news was released, the fans immediately went into an uproar. Under the guidance of the media, they shifted their attention to several other major Hollywood studios. Not far from the headquarters of Firefly, the Warner Brothers headquarters in Burbank, Universal Studios, and other places immediately appeared in front of the headquarters of Firefly, asking for permission from the executives of these two studios, hoping that they could buy the production rights of The Matrix. Of course, there were also media outlets who suspected that Firefly did this to divert attention. At the same time, there were also some fans who suspected that Firefly did this to confuse the public. In fact, they did not intend to give up the production rights of The Matrix. After all, could you imagine Warner Brothers selling Batman or Universal selling The Mummy? However, these doubts could not be maintained for too long under the public statements of Firefly's executives. Although they were very surprised, the reaction of the other major Hollywood studios was definitely much faster than the media and the public. On the day the news was released, countless calls were made to the executives of Firefly and Eric, who was far away in the Bahamas, to find out the truth. In the Bahamas, crew rested for 3 days. Some of the staff had already begun to rush to the capital of the Czech Republic, Prague. Eric would also leave with the last group of people that afternoon. At this time, in the study of the villa where Eric lived on Paradise Island, he was answering a call from Bill Gates. He had already lost count of how many calls he had received in the past 2 days. Yes, Bill. Of course it's true. Although there were all kinds of competitions in private, the two sides did not fall out. They had always maintained a cordial appearance, and Eric's tone was very friendly. However, if Anne Boleyn is interested in this project, you may have to talk to Jeffrey. I've been too busy recently, and I can't take care of this matter. There was no doubt that Bill Gates, or the Amberlin studio that Microsoft and Spielberg were collaborating with, was interested in the Matrix project. From the contract that Amberlin Pictures signed with Paramount a few months ago, everyone could roughly guess the ambition of the other party. 8 film contracts in 3 years was definitely not a lot for a latecomer with aspirations to become a major studio. In fact, it was too little. Any major film company in Hollywood, including MGM, which had recovered, produced more than 8 films a year. Since Microsoft was so ambitious, Amberlin Pictures would definitely produce more than 8 films in 3 years. Therefore, Amberlin Pictures would definitely use these extra films to expand their distribution channels. However, even though Amberlin Pictures had a big shot like Spielberg, it didn't mean that every film he directed would be highly sought after by cinema companies. Furthermore, Spielberg's output in recent years could be said to be relatively low. After taking over the operation of the brand new Amberlin Pictures, it would be considered good if he could direct a film every 3 years. Under such circumstances, Amberlin Pictures was eager to create a film project that could attract the attention of cinema operators. Using the influence of such a project, Amberlin Pictures could quickly establish a distribution network through close cooperation with cinema operators. Therefore, a project like the sequel to The Matrix, which was very guaranteed in terms of box office and influence, was undoubtedly the dream of Amberlin Pictures. On the other end of the phone, Bill Gates said something again. Eric shook his head and said, "Bill, I really can't just give you a random price. We need to sit down and talk about this properly. But you don't have to doubt that as long as Amberlin offers the right price, we will definitely sell it." 250 million. Haha, Bill, although I don't want to talk about it now, if that's all you can offer, I think there is no need for us to continue the discussion. While Eric was chatting with Bill Gates, someone knocked on the door of the study. Kelly pushed the door open. Other than her, There was also Miranda Kerr's fawning little face outside the door. Eric waved at the girl, and Miranda walked in. However, Kelly did not follow. She just closed the door again. Seeing that Eric was on the phone with someone, Miranda relaxed a little. She walked hesitantly to the desk and looked around. She looked at the sofa on the left, but did not dare to take the initiative to sit there. With her hands behind her back, she looked like a student who had made a mistake. She stood there obediently and looked at Eric pitifully. Eric looked up at the girl and smiled. While talking to Bill Gates on the phone, he pressed the mouse and operated the computer on the desk a few times. The printer on the side soon buzzed. Miranda looked at it carefully from the corner of her eyes. When the buzzing stopped, she could roughly see the contents of the A4 paper. It was a credit card receipt. It was obvious that it was the black card in her hand. She shrunk her neck and looked at Eric with some concern. The girl could not help but think of the experience in the past month. Back then, Miranda didn't have any other thoughts when she coquettishly grinded a black card from Eric. She just happened to hear that this credit card's level was very high, and it could even be overdrawn indefinitely. Out of curiosity, she asked Eric for it. Miranda thought that she was a very smart person. Even when she found out that the credit card had an 8-figure balance, the girl did not show too much excitement because she knew that the money did not belong to her. She could not and did not dare to squander it. However, what happened next was still beyond her imagination. It turned out that such a black card represented definitely not just the tens of millions of dollars in the account balance, but a symbol of social power. Because of this black card, her experience in the past month could almost be described as everything you asked for. From the moment she left the Bahamas, because of this black card, she had been enjoying the most meticulous care. The VIP lounge of the airport, the 24-hour luxury car and driver in Miami, the private butler of the top hotel in Orlando, and the personal service of the manager of the Chanel store. Even when she was in Orlando, because she had a cold, she called out in the middle of the night. In less than half an hour, a medical helicopter personally picked her up and took her to the top hospital in Orlando. Since she was a child, even her own parents had never been so meticulous to her. There were many times when Miranda felt that perhaps even the life of a princess was nothing more than this. Although she was precocious, she was still a little girl after all. These extremely satisfying feelings of vanity quickly made her lose herself in it. After playing around in Miami and Orlando, the girl flew to New York at the suggestion of the travel consultant and attended a social gathering of rich kids on the Upper East Side. Although they did not know her identity, because of the black card, the originally proud boys and girls of the Upper East Side were all attentive to her. In the end, Miranda did not dare to check the credit card statement at all. She only occasionally felt that this kind of princess-like life, even if it was just for a month, was enough. So just a month had passed, and as expected, extreme joy turned to sorrow. When she woke up in the top suite of the New York Hilton Hotel, the lobby manager handed her a direct ticket to the Bahamas. Eric chatted with Bill Gates for more than 10 minutes before finally hanging up. Putting down the phone, Eric looked up at the girl who was lowering her head and playing with her toes. He pointed at the credit card statement on the printer next to him. "Give it to me, let me see." Miranda walked over uneasily and tidied up a few pages. She dawdled over to Eric and handed it to him. After thinking for a moment, she boldly wanted to move closer again, but Eric pointed at where she had just been standing. "It's over." Sighing in her heart, Miranda stood back obediently, but still took the initiative to say, "Eric, I'm sorry, I was wrong." Eric looked at the long statement in his hand. Luxury car rental, private driver, medical helicopter, European-style breakfast, limited edition Prada girl bag, Carlton Hotel, Dior gown. Shaking his head from time to time, he clicked his tongue and praised a few times. In the end, the bill for a month was $110,000. Based on the income level of Americans, a middle-class family with both husband and wife working would not necessarily earn $110,000 a year. Eric looked up at the pitiful Miranda. Was she really just a Lolita? No matter how he looked at it, she looked like a Persian cat that had lost control, and the kind that cost a lot of money. Eric suddenly remembered something he had seen on the internet in his previous life. A cat owner installed a GPS camera on his pet, and the next morning, he saw a series of jaw-dropping routes his cat took. Hey, what did I say before? After a while, Eric finally asked. No, don't spend. After playing for a while, go back to Los Angeles obediently. Miranda obediently said in a soft voice. Eric put down the statement in his hand. What about now? Eric, I was wrong, can you forgive me? Of course, Eric did not mind Miranda spending the money. With his current wealth, even if Miranda kept spending money at the same rate for 100 years, it would not affect him much. However, the girl's behavior was a little out of line. Without saying anything else, Eric stretched out his hand to the girl. Give it to me. Miranda was stunned, and suddenly realized that Eric was asking her for the black card. Thinking about the experience during this period, and the scene of being beaten back to square one like Cinderella if she lost the black card, Miranda subconsciously took a step back. However, she quickly realized that if Eric wanted to take back the card, it was not something that she could resist. After hesitating for a while, Miranda carefully begged. Eric, I promise that I will not spend a single cent in the future. Can you let me keep this card? Eric looked at the girl. With the experience of 2 lives, how could he not understand the girl's thoughts? What a scary vanity. Chapter 802. The two of them were in a stalemate for a while. In the end, Eric saw that Miranda was about to cry and almost laughed out loud. Forget it, I'll just take it as raising a kitten. With that thought in mind, Eric no longer insisted on taking back the black card. Anyway, the money this girl spent was indeed a huge sum of money for ordinary people, but for Eric, it was just the cost of a lollipop. Moreover, if this girl in front of him really had the tendency to lose control, Eric only needed to call to cancel the credit card. Miranda had been carefully peeking at Eric's expression changes. As his expression softened, the girl also realized something. She once again put on a fawning smile and said, Eric, really, I won't spend money recklessly again. Eric's tone did not change. He did not want the girl to be too proud. He said in a flat tone, Kelly will return to Los Angeles in the afternoon. You go back with her. You are not allowed to leave Los Angeles for the whole year. Miranda immediately found the flaw in Eric's words and said coquettishly, Then what if Mom and Dad want me to go back to Australia for Christmas? Okay, Eric, I will be obedient. Miranda saw that Eric's face was gloomy again, and did not dare to play tricks. She turned around the desk and intimately wanted to hug Eric's neck. Eric raised his hand and pushed the girl's small waist away. He said, Don't pester people. Go find Kelly. Hee, Eric, you are really a coward. 2. Annoying, you actually use this method to scare people. Although she realized that Eric was counting down, the little fairy did not dare to test Eric's patience anymore. She turned around and slipped out of the study. Seeing the door close, Eric shook his head and smiled. He once again picked up the few pages of credit card statements on the table. He leaned back, put his feet on the table, and slowly flipped through them. At the same time, he was thinking about how to arrange the future of this little kitten. In any case, Eric did not intend to let Miranda walk the path of the past supermodel. How tiring that would be. Since it was a cat, of course, it should lie comfortably on the master's sofa and enjoy life with its eyes closed. Due to its geographical location at the border of Eastern and Western Europe, and the support of Germany and other Western European powers, the Czech Republic could be considered the first country to develop after the upheaval in Eastern Europe. Of course, in terms of economy, it was far inferior to Germany and France. Casino Royale was mainly shot in Prague in the Czech Republic. The scenes included a car chase scene between Bond and the villain, as well as some dialogue scenes. In addition, the exterior shots of Bond's train ride to Montenegro were also shot at the Czech Mountain Railway. As for Montenegro, the Bosnia-Herzegovina war that had lasted for more than 3 years had just ended at the end of last year. The few countries there were still in chaos, so there was no possibility of filming on the spot. Because of the publicity effect of the 007 series in the country and the city where it was shot, the Czech government, which was eager to further open up, attached great importance to the shooting. When shooting the chase scene between Bond and the villain, they even blocked 2 streets for a week. While the crew was shooting in the Czech Republic, the North American summer was entering its final stage. After Men in Black 2, Game of Bravehearts 2 officially hit the 2,800 big screens in North America the following week. However, the ending was shocking, because that week, MGM also released the second part of the Resident Evil series, Resident Evil Revelations. The first week box office of Game of Bravehearts 2, which cost $86 million, lost to Resident Evil Revelations, which was not very noticeable. This was a very embarrassing result. The first Resident Evil, which cost $30 million, earned $60 million in box office in North America, and the global box office totaled $126 million. Moreover, this apocalyptic sci-fi movie performed even better in the video market. Within a year of the release of the video and DVD, the producers had a net profit of more than $60 million. Therefore, the production cost of Resident Evil Revelations soared to $45 million. During the production stage, MGM's plan was to recoup most of the cost from the box office. The main source of profit was the income from the video and copyright. MGM now had enough power to operate these long-term businesses. Before the 2 movies were released, although Game of Bravehearts 2 had a bad reputation, most box office analysts estimated that the first week box office would be no less than $50 million. However, the final result was that Resident Evil Revelations grossed $28.37 million in the first week, while Game of Bravehearts 2 grossed $25.22 million in the first week. The 2 new movies only occupied the 3rd and 4th positions on the weekly box office rankings. In terms of word of mouth, the media's reviews were not good because of the disadvantages of the Resident Evil series. The average score was only 6.5 out of 10. However, based on the $28.37 million in the first week, the total box office for this sequel might reach $70 million. Including the overseas box office, it was enough to recoup all the production and distribution costs. On the other hand, Game of Bravehearts 2 failed miserably. Its box office was only $22 million in the first week, which was 50% lower than most agencies' expectations. Also, because of the confusing plot, the media only gave the film a score of 4.6 out of 10. Most of the film critics' comments were, "A farce with a lot of CG scenes." Under such circumstances, the failure of Game of Bravehearts 2 was already set. Firefly had only participated in the production of $50 million, and with the income from the box office and later copyright operations, it would more or less make up for the loss. Sony Pictures was not only involved in the production, but they were also the main distributor. Their losses were much greater than Firefly's. More importantly, the failure of this project did not affect Firefly much. Instead, it was a huge blow to Sony Pictures' movie business. The only consolation was that the box office for Game of Bravehearts 2 was not strong enough. That was why it did not affect the box office for Men in Black 2. After the $75.5 million in the first week, the box office for Men in Black 2 dropped by 31% and earned $52.09 million. The total box office for 2 weeks was $127 million. In the third week, the box office for The Breakin' Doll 2 dropped from 43% to 25%. The box office for the week was $32.49 million. The total box office for the week was $156 million. Also, as there were no strong new films coming out during the summer, the box office for both Men in Black 2 and The Breakin' Doll 2 would last longer. When Eric heard about the news, he asked about the progress of Sony's Godzilla. Godzilla will start filming in New York in June, but the filming for Godzilla was much shorter than Casino Royale. It only needs 3 months. Of course, as a CG blockbuster, the post-production period was much longer than Casino Royale. According to Sony Pictures' release schedule, the film will be released during next year's summer. Although Sony had not confirmed the release date, there is still a high possibility that there will be a clash between Casino Royale and Godzilla next year, just like this year's Thunderbolt Girls 2 and Men in Black 2. Eric remembered the image of a certain Tyrannosaurus Rex and started to look forward to next year's summer. Next year is 1997. What year is that? The Asian financial crisis. In his memory, although Japan was not directly affected by the crisis, the whole Southeast Asian economy will be affected. Under such circumstances, Sony will not have a good time. If they suffer another failure in their movie business, they will be in trouble. TSK. Just thinking about it makes Feng Yu happy. Soon it was August. 2 weeks of filming in the Czech Republic had passed. The crew moved to Italy again. The filming period in Italy was 1 month. There were 2 important scenes, which were the gambling scene between Bond and the villain Cheever at the Casino Royale, and the death of Vesper, played by Cate Blanchett. At the same time, the Breakin' Doll trio and Vesper's sister will appear in Italy for a short time. Charlie and the other 2 were promoting the Breakin' Doll 2 overseas. Their schedule was very tight. Their scenes were mainly focused on the British mainland, which was the rescue of Vesper's sister, Angela Lind. If they didn't make it in time, the 3 women might return to Italy for a short reshoot after they finished filming in the United Kingdom. Although the trio could not make it to Italy immediately, Christina Aguilera, who played Vesper's sister, Angela Rinder, joined the crew after the crew moved to Italy. However, while the crew was busy filming, Eric had to pay attention to another matter. After the meeting, with the help of Firefly, the Venice Film Festival quickly agreed to use Titanic as the opening film of this year's Venice Film Festival. After all, because of Eric's indulgence, when Cameron completed the film, the overall cost of Titanic had reached an unprecedented $215 million, 15 million more than in the original universe. Although the Venice Film Festival had always adhered to a cold artistic style, it was difficult for them to reject a film that could be recorded in the Guinness Book of World Records. When the Venice Film Festival sent out the official invitation and released the news to the media, Cameron had already arrived in Venice with the sample film. It was August 3rd. Eric had just finished a day's work. Before he had time to rest, he heard from Peter Ritchie that Cameron had arrived. In the hotel where the crew was staying, Eric saw the unshaven Cameron again. Although Eric had reassured Cameron knew that if this film with a cost of more than $200 million failed, it would be a huge blow to his career. Therefore, his hair had obviously turned white these days. "Hey Eric, how's the film going?" Seeing Eric walk into the lobby, Cameron, who had been waiting for him in the lobby, immediately came up to him. Everything went well. Eric hugged Cameron gently. He looked at the guy's haggard face and smiled. "Let's go eat first. The food in this hotel restaurant is good. After dinner, we'll watch the film together." Of course. Cameron nodded. Because the 2 of them were a little absent-minded, the meal was quickly finished. After quickly filling their stomachs, the 2 of them went into the hotel's private screening room. "The film might be a bit long," Cameron said when the lights dimmed. He then said, "But I think it's best not to trim it." Although he said this, Cameron's tone was obviously not very firm. Eric had given him the greatest support in terms of the film budget. Cameron was not a completely unreasonable person. When he was in Hollywood, he could yell at Katzenberg, "If you want to cut the film, kill me first." But if Eric insisted, Cameron would try his best to reduce the length of the film. The film in front of them was 187 minutes long. In the entire history of Hollywood, the only film that lasted more than 3 hours and achieved box office success was 1939's Gone with the Wind. Other than that, most similar films might have achieved some artistic achievements, but there were very few that could achieve high box office results. After all, for a movie, only 3 hours was enough to make most of the audience flinch. Although Cameron was very confident in his work, he did not think that Titanic could be compared to Gone with the Wind, a legendary film with epic-making significance. The idea of shooting Titanic was deliberately led by Eric when he was chatting with several famous directors and producers at Praia Vista Studios. Eric also participated in the writing of part of the script. Therefore, the plot of the new version of Titanic was roughly the same as the original. The biggest difference was undoubtedly the female lead. Compared to Fat One, Rachel Weisz, who had a slender figure an elegant temperament, a delicate face, and a rebellious heart, was undoubtedly more suitable for the role of Rose. When the elderly Rose began to reminisce about the past on the big screen, Rachel appeared for the first time. Her tall and slender figure, classic makeup, as well as the proud aura of a British noble lady, stunned Eric. He even felt that some of his regrets had been made up for. Cameron's control of the plot was undoubtedly at the master level. Although the whole film was 3 hours and 7 minutes long, every minute of the plot was able to firmly drive the audience's emotions, and it did not give the audience the slightest feeling of superfluity. The scenes of the Titanic sailing on the sea, Jack and Rose hugging each other at the bow of the ship at sunset, and the industrial atmosphere in the cabin, brought about almost breathtaking beauty and shock. Although the disaster in the second half of the film was short, whether it was the good and evil of human nature at the moment of the disaster, or the scene of Jack and Rose parting, it was enough to deeply touch the audience's heart. Eric had seen Titanic many times before, but as a reborn person, seeing another perfect version of Titanic again, his blood still surged. When the film ended, Eric did not realize that more than 3 hours had passed unknowingly. He turned his head to say something to Cameron, and suddenly noticed that the pure music at the end of the film was still playing. That's right, it was a pure music that combined piano, bagpipes, violin, and other instruments. Although it still sounded beautiful, it had nothing to do with the original My Heart Will Go On. Chapter 803. Cameron saw that Eric, who was about to speak, suddenly turned his eyes to the screen. He asked curiously, "Eric, what do you think?" Eric stopped thinking about it and nodded. "It's a perfect film, Jim. I just think there are some small flaws at the end of the film." Eric didn't immediately ask about the length of the film, so Cameron was a little relieved. He said, "Are you talking about the scene where Rose dreams of Titanic? If I remember correctly, you were the one who suggested adding that scene. I think the effect is pretty good." "No, not that part." Eric shook his head and said, "I'm talking about the ending song. Although the music is good, I still feel that it's a little monotonous. Maybe it would be better to change it to a song." "Did you guys discuss this possibility when James was the composer?" The James that Eric was talking about was James Horner, the composer of Titanic. In his memory, My Heart Will Go On was a collaborative work between James Horner and another composer. Eric didn't know how Cameron and James Horner worked together in his previous life, because he learned that during the production of Alien 2 in 1986, Cameron and James Horner had a bad relationship over the years, due to their different ideologies. In order to preserve the original flavor of Titanic as much as possible, Eric personally invited James Horner to be the composer of the film, and personally came forward to mediate between the two. Before the shooting of Casino Royale, he, Cameron, and James Horner had a meal together in Praia Vista. When Cameron heard Eric's question, he shook his head and said, "James did write a song. It was inspired by the last scene of the film. It's called In My Dreams. I felt that the mood of the lyrics didn't fit the theme of the film, so I only used the music version. It's the ending song we just heard." Eric told the projectionist to put the ending song aside, and asked Cameron for the details of the lyrics. In the end, he just shook his head in disappointment. This song wasn't as classic as My Heart Will Go On. In fact, writing a song was like writing a poem or painting. It required inspiration. Eric should have thought of it from the beginning. The main body of Titanic could maintain the same style as the original under his influence, but when it came to the ending song, it was impossible for James Horner to have the same inspiration as in his previous life under the influence of Eric. In the original space-time, the success of Titanic benefited from the overall quality of the film. However, to use of My Heart Will Go On wasn't the finishing touch of the film. It was definitely a sublimation of Titanic. Eric didn't want to miss it. After thinking about it, he said, "James shouldn't be too busy recently. When I just watched the film, I happened to have some inspiration. If he can come to Italy, maybe we can come up with a good ending song before the Venice Film Festival." Cameron liked the song New Divide that Eric came up with very much. He also watched the complete video of the first Victoria's Secret show, so he didn't doubt that Eric had the ability to compose an ending song for Titanic. He just said, Eric, if you're in Los Angeles, it's not likely that James will come to Italy. He's already working on the soundtrack for Edward Zwick's Life and Death. Speaking of which, if you have the inspiration, why don't you do it yourself? Eric spread his hands and said, It's not like you don't know what I've been doing recently. I may be able to come up with the lyrics and music, but I don't have the time to arrange and record the specific work. Cameron said, Eric, although it's impossible that James just came over, as long as you can come up with the lyrics and music, Europe is so big, you'll definitely be able to find an excellent musician to help arrange the music. Even if the effect is still not good, the film won't be released until the end of the year. We still have enough time to modify it, don't you think? In that case, it should be too late for the screening at the Venice Film Festival, right? Just treat it as a surprise for the audience, Cameron said. Of course, this must be under the condition that the song you write is good enough. Otherwise, I definitely won't use it. I don't want a bad song to ruin the whole film. In the end, Cameron's tone became habitually critical. Eric narrowed his eyes and nodded gently. Then he said, Okay, let's talk about the director's problem. Of course, Cameron could tell that Eric was fighting back against his words, but he almost jumped up and said, Hey Eric, you're not such a petty person. Of course so. Eric reached out and patted Cameron's shoulder. Seeing that Cameron's eyes were wide open and his expression was obviously lifted, he stopped panting and said, I don't think we should change it for a minute. We'll release it according to this version. Haha, I knew it. Cameron suddenly turned from worry to joy. He even wanted to say something, but he immediately stopped himself. Cameron originally wanted to say that since this version was approved by Liu Zhou, he could not be blamed if the box office did not do well. But he quickly realized that if he really said that, he would be too irresponsible. Cameron put away these thoughts and raised his fist to hit Eric's shoulder. He said, Eric, I recently took some time to read some Spider-Man comics, and I have some good ideas. Well, if when the time comes you still want me to film it, just let me know. No matter what, this project is yours. We discussed it, Eric said. Or, I can ask Los Angeles to send the contract over tomorrow. Cameron was a sentimental person. He remembered that since last year, Eric had maintained a supportive attitude towards him. Now that he heard these words, he could not help but feel emotional. He said, Eric, I can only promise you that I will do my best. Eric was not good at having a heart-to-heart talk with a man. Seeing that Cameron was being serious, he laughed and said, It's still early. Why don't we go downstairs to the bar for a drink? Cameron also quickly collected his emotions and nodded freely. He said, Of course, well, but I have to personally send the copy to the bank safe first. The copy in front of us is worth $215 million US. If there is an accident, our 2 years of hard work may be in vain. As the two spoke, they got up together and left the screening room. Christina Aguilera had been with the crew for a week. She came to Italy on August 1st. The entire crew did not include the more mobile extras. There were more than 200 permanent staff and actors, and they lived in several different hotels. Because she joined the crew at the last minute, she was not arranged to stay in the same hotel as Eric, but across the street. Christina had very few scenes in Venice. The specific plot was that Angela Lin had to be kidnapped by the Phantom Gang and brought to Venice to threaten her sister, Vesper Lin, to hand over the huge sum of money. Because she was only tied to a chair for a short scene to prove to Vesper Lin that her sister was still alive, she would then be brought back to the United Kingdom. Therefore, she did not even have a line in Venice, and no one could pay attention to her. However, because she had a work pass as a crew member, although Eric only took time out to say hello to her, Christina could enter the set every day and stand outside to watch the process of Eric shooting the movie. After seeing Eric commanding the entire huge crew like a king, Christina felt more and more insignificant. It was inevitable that she would worship him like a little girl. Another day of filming ended. In the evening, Christina and her assistant, Milia, left the set early and found a restaurant to have dinner, while discussing the recent gossip they had heard. Although Milia was 10 years older than Christina, she was a chatterbox. She chattered endlessly. I heard that Pierce Brosnan was scolded by Mr. Williams again. It seems like he can't keep up with your sister's pace. Now, many media outlets in North America are still saying that your sister is not beautiful enough, but I think many people will be surprised when the movie is released in the future. Well, I just don't know how Mr. Williams found such an actress. She didn't even have a single film in Hollywood before. Before the start of filming, the news that Cate Blanchett was the new Bond girl was released, and it caused a lot of media outlets to discuss it crazily. Most of the comments said that Cate Blanchett's appearance was not outstanding enough to play the role of a Bond girl. Although Cate won a lot of support in the end with her professional appearance, the overall trend was still that she was not suitable for the role. However, during the recent filming, Cate's role as Vesper Lynd was very eye-catching. Many times, she even completely overshadowed Pierce Brosnan's limelight. After all, if the Bond girl this time was just a pretty face like before, it would be difficult for Pierce Brosnan's limelight to be stolen. However, Vesper Lynd was a female character with a very distinct personality. Therefore, it gave Cate a great platform to showcase her extremely talented and skillful acting skills. After all, this was a 007 movie. Although Eric wanted Cate to be more outstanding, he would not allow her to completely overshadow Pierce Brosnan. Therefore, while adjusting Pierce Brosnan's acting skills, Eric had to slightly suppress Cate's sharpness. Of course, although the news of the male lead being overshadowed by Cate Blanchett was kept under wraps, there was still a lot of news that leaked out. It was an open secret within the crew. As for the news that spread to the media, most of it was treated as a publicity stunt by the crew, and it did not attract much attention. Christina was a little absent-minded as she ate her ice cream with a spoon. She listened to Milia's words and said, "Milia, can you not always say my sister? It sounds weird. I've only spoken a few words with Miss Blanchett." "Hey, I'm helping you get into character," Milia said. "Think about it. Even Pierce Brosnan was scolded. If you don't perform well in the future, Mr. Williams won't be too polite." Christina had already memorized the few pages of her script by heart. She had also rehearsed her lines with Milia countless times. At this time, she was already at the point where she could blurt out her lines. With a few years of acting experience in the Mickey Mouse Club, although Christina was a little worried about her performance, she was not afraid of stage fright. "Eric is a very nice person. I don't think he'll scold me," Christina said with some uncertainty. After all, little girls had their own fantasies. Although Milia looked a little careless, she would never take the initiative to touch on certain sensitive topics, such as the relationship between the employer in front of her and Eric Williams. Therefore, after hearing Christina's words, she didn't refute. However, with more experience than Christina, she knew very well that most of the directors in Hollywood had different personalities on set and in private. No matter how gentlemanly they were in private, once they were in the director's mode, this group of people would often become harsh and manic. The better the director, the more likely it was like this. Eric might be very gentle to Christina in private, but if Christina's performance during filming was not good and affected the progress of the crew, she would definitely be scolded. According to the gossip in the circle, when Julia Roberts was filming Pretty Woman, a few years ago, she was scolded more than once by Eric Williams. There were even rumors that she was scolded until she had problems or something. After a while, Milia started a new topic and said, "Let's not talk about this. Well, wake up early tomorrow. I heard that there's an explosion scene tomorrow morning. It must be very exciting. I haven't seen it before." Christina was about to answer when a man in his 30s walked in from the door of the restaurant. The two girls looked at him at the same time, and vaguely remembered that he should be Eric's assistant. Before they could react, the man had already walked towards them. "Miss Aguilera, you're here. I've been looking for you for a while." Christina quickly got up and asked, Is Eric looking for me?" "Yes." "Oh, let me introduce myself. I'm Peter Ritchie." The man introduced himself and greeted Milia. Then he said, "Come with me. Mr. Williams is waiting for you." "Oh, okay." Christina originally wanted to ask why Eric was looking for her, but when she saw that Peter Ritchie had already turned and walked out, she dismissed the thought and hurriedly followed him. Milia quickly paid the bill, picked up the bag that Christina had left on the seat, and followed him out. Chapter 804. When they arrived at the hotel room where Eric was staying, Peter Ritchie knocked on the door. After getting a response, he pushed the door open and said to Christina, who was behind him, "Miss Aguilera, please go in. The boss is waiting for you." Christina subconsciously glanced at her assistant, Milia, who was behind her. Peter Ritchie noticed her gaze and said, "Oh, this is Milia Anton," said Milia quickly. Peter Ritchie nodded and said, "Miss Austen, you can go back to the hotel first." "Oh, of course." Milia was a little disappointed that she could not go in to see Eric, but she did not dare to refute. When she saw Christina enter the room, she reluctantly turned around and left. Christina thought that Eric was alone in the room. After she entered the room, she realized that Eric was discussing something with another middle-aged man around a piano near the balcony. Cameron first noticed Christina entering the room. When he saw the petite and sweet-looking girl in front of him, he subconsciously asked, "Eric, is this the singer you found?" Although Christina knew about the Terminator series, and had also heard about Titanic, which had been hotly discussed by the media for the past 6 months, she did not recognize Cameron. However, the girl was very perceptive. When she saw Cameron leaning against the piano with his slightly wrinkled shirt and messy hair, she realized that he was at least Eric's good friend. Otherwise, he would not dare to be so sloppy in front of Eric. Therefore, although Cameron's tone was full of doubt, Christina still smiled at him. When she saw Eric turn around, she quickly greeted him. "Eric, are you looking for me?" Eric sat beside the piano and had no intention of getting up. He only nodded at her and said, "Yes, come here." Christina obediently walked to the other side of Eric and looked around curiously. There were a few manuscripts in front of Eric and on the piano table. They seemed to be music scores. Cameron and Eric each had a pencil in their hands. The manuscripts were also full of annotations. Seeing the girl's lively eyes looking around and landing on Cameron, Eric smiled and introduced them. "Here, this is Christina Aguilera. Oh, this is James Cameron. You must have heard of him." "Of course." Christina nodded. Although she had subconsciously stood on the other side of Eric, the girl still extended her small hand and said, "Director Cameron, hello. I like your movies very much." "Oh, really?" Cameron shook Christina's small hand and jokingly said, "You don't look old enough to watch my movies." Before Titanic, other than Abyss, Cameron's movies were all R-rated. That meant that children under the age of 17 would need to be accompanied by their parents to watch them. He did not think that the girl in front of him, who was just over 1.5 meters tall, had watched his movies. Even if she had, she probably would not have liked them too much. With that said, Cameron turned his gaze to Eric. Since Eric had called the girl to his side, he was sure that she was the person Eric was looking for. For the past few days, Eric spent his free time every night composing the lyrics and melody for "My Heart Will Go On." Today, he had completed the basic work. Although he and Cameron could already hum the melody, it was difficult for two grown men to sing the melody of "My Heart Will Go On." Cameron suggested that they find a female singer to try it out. Eric immediately thought of Christina, who had just joined the cast a few days ago. Putting aside the fact that in the original space-time, Christina's singing was powerful enough to squeeze into the 100 greatest singers of all time, at such a young age. Ever since she came into contact with music, Christina imitated the path of female singers like Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey. Therefore, although she did not have Celine Dion's natural voice, in terms of singing, she did not lose to Celine Dion, who had a single musical style. Eric arranged the score in front of him and explained, "Jim, we're just looking for a girl to try out the effect of this song. Also, I assure you that in our entire crew, Christina is definitely the best singer." "Alright, I hope so." Cameron would not be too serious with Eric since they were just trying out the song. However, Eric smiled and asked Christina, who was beside him, for years ago, Whitney Houston acted in The Bodyguard. "Do you know how to sing the theme song of that movie?" Christina said. "Is it I Will Always Love You?" Eric nodded and waved at Cameron. He smiled and said, "Show Jim a few lines." Although the singing style of I Will Always Love You was different from My Heart Will Go On, both songs were lyrical songs. Moreover, I Will Always Love You was even more difficult to sing than My Heart Will Go On. Cameron also liked music, so it was impossible for him not to know this. Christina frequently went on stage since she was 8 years old, so she did not have any stage fright in her heart. She took 2 small steps back, gathered her emotions, and began to sing. If I should stay would only be in your way, I'll go, but I'll think of you every step of the way. Cameron originally looked like he was watching a good show with interest, but as the petite girl sang with an explosive and rich soprano voice that was almost exactly the same as Whitney Houston's, Cameron quickly put away his nonchalant expression. He even looked Christina up and down with a face full of surprise, as if he was trying to figure out how this small body in front of him could display such a powerful explosive power. There were still a lot of things to do at the moment, but Eric did not have the patience to wait for Christina to finish singing. When Cameron's expression began to change, Eric smiled and interrupted the girl, saying, "All right, let's stop here." Christina paused and quickly stopped singing. She thought that she did not sing well. She blinked and stood on the spot, a hint of helplessness flashing in her eyes. This time, Cameron began to fight for justice for Christina. He said, "Hey Eric, why didn't you let Christina finish singing? You're so rude." Eric ignored this arrogant guy and said to Christina, "It's okay, you sang very well. It's just that we're a little pressed for time. Come, take a look at these scores first. Sing for us later." Christina realized that there was nothing wrong with her and relaxed. She did not forget to smile politely at Cameron, who spoke up for her. She walked over and took the scores from Eric's hands. "This is the theme song for a movie that I just wrote. Jim wants to hear the effect, so he asked you to come over," Eric said. When he saw Christina standing next to him and looking at the scores, he turned his head and said to Cameron, who was leaning against the piano, "Buddy, can you bring a chair over for our little singer?" I can do it myself," Christina, who had already begun to hum softly, quickly said when she heard that. She did not dare to let a great director like Cameron move a chair for her. However, before the girl could move, Cameron had already passed a chair behind him to her. He said, "Here, little girl." "Oh no, Christina, take it." It was a very heavy solid wooden chair. Cameron did not feel anything when he picked it up, so he passed it over casually. However, Christina had a hard time picking it up. Eric quickly got up and helped to place the chair behind Christina. Christina sat down and began to read the scores carefully. Although she did not have any talent in composing, she had been taking music lessons continuously all these years. It was still very easy for her to read the scores. When Eric saw the girl looking down at the scores, he knew that they might have to wait for a while. Taking advantage of this time, he got up and walked to the fridge. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey and a glass of juice and handed them to Cameron and Christina. He held a glass for himself and chatted casually with Cameron. He said, "I think we can consider the Scottish whistle for the beginning arrangement. This instrument has appeared a few times in the movie, and it fits very well with the female singing at the end of the plot." Scottish whistle. Cameron thought for a while and said, "Oh, I remember now. James did say that there is such an instrument here. I don't know if it can be bought in Venice. If you want to hear the effect, you can get the assistant to look for it tomorrow." Cameron nodded. Seeing that Christina was still reading the score line by line, he said, "Eric, this is too slow. Why don't you sing it for her? I think Christina will learn it after listening to it once or twice." Eric looked at Christina. Seeing the girl nod, he took the score and said, "All right, I'll sing it a cappella first. Listen to it." Christina's musical talent was indeed very strong. Eric only had to sing it softly once and Christina could roughly understand the lyrics. Eric also instructed the girl on some of the pronunciation methods. After practicing a few times, Eric and Cameron listened to the professional female singers, "My Heart Will Go On," with the accompaniment of the piano. As Christina deliberately suppressed her voice according to Eric's request, she did not display the masculine and fierce voice that she was good at. Therefore, the girl's cover of "My Heart Will Go On" had a hint of Celine Dion's natural charm. At least, Eric and Cameron were very satisfied listening to it. After Christina finished singing for the 3rd time, Cameron clapped his hands excitedly and said, "Great, very great. Eric, I've decided to use this song as the ending song for Titanic. Yes, I think I should have this song completed before the Venice Film Festival because this song and the film are a perfect match. I don't want to wait a moment longer. I'll fly back to Los Angeles tomorrow and get James to arrange the song as soon as possible. We'll try to finish it before the film festival. This kind of song was very taxing. After Christina finished singing, she was sipping her juice. When she heard Cameron say that this song was going to be the theme song for Titanic, she was a little surprised. Although many people were pessimistic that Titanic would be the next future Waterworld, it was still a blockbuster movie that cost $215 million US. If she could sing the theme song for such a movie, then with that thought in mind, Christina put down her glass and blinked at Eric. There are still 20 days before the opening ceremony. I think if we rush it a little, it shouldn't be a problem. Eric also nodded. Cameron had originally planned to take his time to compose this song, if it was suitable. However, at this moment he was on a whim and did not object to making the premiere of Titanic more perfect at the opening ceremony of the Venice Film Festival. So he replied. At the same time, he felt Christina's little face looking at him with anticipation. Eric smiled and reached out to pinch Christina's face. He said, "Don't think about it. This song isn't suitable for you. You can't go down the path of lyrical songs. Firefly Records will be releasing a single for you at the end of the year. So it's better to work hard according to the route the company has prepared for you." Christina shrunk her neck, but she did not resist Eric's slightly intimate action at all. She smiled and said, "Yes, I know, Eric." However, Cameron sensitively noticed the interaction between the two. His eyes flashed and he raised his hand to look at his watch. Unknowingly, it was already 9:15 at night. "All right, Eric, I'll go back and prepare now. I'll fly back to Los Angeles tomorrow." Cameron finished the whiskey in his glass, straightened up, and waved at Christina. "Good night." Christina replied politely, "Good night, Mr. Cameron." Eric got up and walked Cameron to the door. Cameron saw that Christina did not follow, so he reached out and pulled Eric out of the door. He whispered, "Hey Eric, although I don't want to interfere with your private matters, but..." He pointed into the house and lowered his voice again. "How old is she?" Eric shrugged helplessly and said, 16. "Really?" Cameron was in disbelief. After all, compared to the average height of Western girls, Christina, who was only about 1.5 meters tall, seemed a little too petite. "Of course." Eric nodded with certainty and said, "Also Jim, I haven't touched her. In general, I'm still a decent person." Cameron also knew that Eric had no reason to lie to him about these things. He shrugged and suddenly made a pinching gesture in the air. He smiled and said, "You really haven't touched her?" Eric smiled and reached out to hit Cameron's shoulder. He said, "All right, go back and book your flight tickets. Tomorrow, get your ass back to Los Angeles and work for me." "Hey you." Cameron was not annoyed. He chatted with Eric for a while more before leaving. Eric returned to his suite. Christina was still sitting on the chair and reading the music score, looking like an obedient little girl. Walking to the piano, Eric casually played a few keys and said, "Let's go, Christina. I'll send you back. You seem to be staying in the hotel facing the street, right?" Christina, who was originally burying her head in pretense, raised her little head. Her face was slightly red, but she mustered her courage and said, "Eric, can I stay?" How old are you?" Eric asked subconsciously. 16. Christina's bright eyes flashed as she answered with a smile. She even imitated Eric's tone when he answered Cameron. Eric smiled and reached out to pinch Christina's face again. He said, "Eavesdropping on other people's conversations is not a good habit." This time, Christina boldly grabbed Eric's hand and pressed it to her chest. She blinked and stared at Eric. Her face became even redder. She said, "Then Eric, punish me." Chapter 805. Faintly feeling that someone was staring at her, Christina Aguilera opened her eyes and happened to notice Eric sitting by the bed with a smile. The various scenes from last night quickly rushed into her mind. Feeling the body under the thin blanket and the big bed without any hindrance, Christina blushed slightly and pulled at the corner of the blanket. She greeted softly, "Good morning, Eric. Seeing that you're sleeping so soundly, I didn't know if I should wake you up." Eric reached over and gently brushed away a strand of messy hair on the girl's cheek. Seeing that she was a little nervous, he asked, "Are you still not feeling well?" "Yes, I feel like there's something." Christina's eyelashes drooped, and she was a little embarrassed to stop halfway through her sentence. "Then rest here for the next few days. The place you're staying at is definitely not as good as here. I've ordered breakfast for you. When you wake up, call customer service and they'll send it over. If you need anything else, you can also call my assistant," Eric said as he placed a small card on the bedside table. "This is his number." Christina looked at Eric a little dejectedly and said, "Are you going to work?" "Yes, it's already 8 o'clock. There are hundreds of people waiting for me." Christina nodded and said obediently, "Okay then, goodbye." "Goodbye." Eric leaned over and kissed the girl's cheek. Christina boldly raised her little head and kissed him back. She even naughtily stuck out the tip of her tongue and licked Eric's face. Eric did not mind. He smiled and said, "You're really like a kitten." Christina giggled and said, "Eric, you seem to like cats very much." "No, I don't like cats. I like women who are like cats. Docile, lazy, mysterious. Of course, occasionally wild and untamed." Christina blinked quickly and said, "Then can I be your kitten?" "No problem." Eric smiled and pinched Christina's cheek. He stood up and said, "Then I'll go back to work." I'll bring you out to play during this week's break. Where do you want to go?" Christina looked excited, but then she said, "I'm not familiar with Venice. I'll go wherever you go, Eric." "We can't do that. The Venice Film Festival is about to start, and we are filming here. There are too many reporters in Venice these days. If we play here, we will definitely be chased and intercepted. We have to go further away. How about Paris?" Christina's little head was still spinning. Of course, she wanted to go to Paris. Which girl didn't want to go to Paris? However, the crew only had one day off every week. Could they go that far? Eric could guess Christina's thoughts from her confused expression. He pinched her cheeks and did not explain. He smiled and said, "Paris it is then. I'll go to work first. You can continue sleeping. You can wake up whenever you want." She waved at Eric and waited patiently for him to disappear. Finally, she heard the soft sound of the door closing in the living room. After lazing in bed for a while, Christina got out of bed. She called her assistant, Milia, and vaguely explained that she had stayed at the hotel where Eric was staying last night. She did not make it clear. She believed that her assistant was aware, and told her to do whatever she wanted for the next few days. Christina hung up the phone and called room service for breakfast. After filling her stomach, the girl threw herself onto the big bed and fell asleep quickly. When she woke up again, it was already evening. There was almost no light coming in from outside the thick curtains. There were faint sounds of people talking in the living room. Christina quietly put on her clothes and walked to the door to open it. She only walked out when she saw that Eric was alone in the living room, talking on the phone. When Eric saw Christina walk out of the bedroom, he nodded at her and pointed at the sofa opposite him. Christina walked over and sat down on the sofa. She was only wearing a tight t-shirt and jeans. She was barefooted. Although the floor was very clean, there was no carpet. She felt that the floor was a little cold. She curled up her legs and hugged a pillow as she curled up on the sofa. She quietly listened to Eric on the phone. "If that's the case, we can accept the price of $300 million US. Eric held the phone with one hand and flipped through the blue folder on his lap. He was discussing something with the person on the other end. "However, we can't compromise on the payment terms. If Amberlin wants the copyright of The Matrix, they have to pay in full as soon as possible after signing the contract. It's only $300 million US. Jeffrey, with the power of Microsoft behind Amberlin, as long as they are serious about this deal, they can definitely come up with the money." When Christina heard Eric casually mention $300 million US, she stuck her tongue out. She also knew that Firefly was selling the rights to the sequel of The Matrix, but she didn't expect the rights to be so valuable. $300 million US. Eric happened to notice Christina sticking her tongue out. He thought that the girl was being naughty and waved his hand at her, indicating that she shouldn't be naughty. Christina shrunk her neck and smiled at Eric. There's one more thing. After Eric finished talking with Katzenberg about The Matrix, he continued, I've seen the finished film of Titanic. Other than the ending song, there are no problems. Jim flew back to Los Angeles this morning to settle the new ending song. I wrote the song myself. Get the record department to cooperate, and try to get it done before the opening ceremony of the Venice Film Festival. Also, the publicity work can start now. I don't plan to compress the film anymore, so get the distribution department to discuss the corresponding publicity plan. Battlestar Cop 2? Eric hesitated, thought for a while, and said, It's better not to release it at the same time as Titanic. I know you guys don't have much confidence in this film. We have no right to interfere with other companies' plans, but Firefly can't possibly attack itself. Let's postpone it and release it during the summer next year. This sequel should have the ability to support the summer. Well, that's it then. After hanging up the phone, Eric smiled and waved at Christina when he saw that she was listening to him attentively. Christina hugged a pillow and sat down beside Eric. She curled up her legs and gently leaned against Eric. She looked at the document on his lap and said, Eric, what's this? Eric knew that the girl wasn't really interested. She just wanted to find a topic to talk about. He said, Nothing, some copyright transfer contract information. Christina glanced at the document a few times, but she was smart enough not to read it in detail. She asked, Is it The Matrix? Yes. Eric nodded and flipped to the first page of the document. He wanted to read it again. He felt Christina's small body rubbing against him from time to time. He smiled and said, Looking at you just now, you should be fine now, right? Christina was stunned. Soon she pitifully begged for mercy. Eric, tonight I can't do it yet. Eric smiled. His eyes were still on the document in front of him, but he changed the topic. He said, What do you want to eat tonight? Christina was still worried that Eric would torture her again at night. If that was the case, she felt that she might be ruined. When she heard Eric change the topic, she replied absent-mindedly, I don't know. Breakfast, it's not bad. That's breakfast. Eric said, Forget it. Call room service and ask them to send a menu over. You can choose what you want to eat. Okay. Christina nodded. She thought for a while and gently tugged at Eric's t-shirt sleeve. She looked like she wanted to say something but stopped herself. Eric turned his head and saw Christina's pitiful expression. He recalled what she said just now and understood. It had to be said that Christina was in the best period of her life. She had a sweet face, a petite body and a slender body, coupled with her pitiful expression that said, Don't bully me, okay? She could indeed arouse a man's desire to ravage her. Don't think too much. You just need to rest well these few days. Eric smiled and reached out to pinch the girl's face. He said, If you don't want to stay here, you can go back to the hotel by the street. When she heard this, she remembered Eric's overall gentle behavior last night. Christina was relieved. She smiled sweetly and said, I'm not leaving. Well, I'm going to call for the menu. As the girl said this, she jumped off the sofa and reached out to pick up the mobile phone Eric had just put down. She began to dial. Eric smiled and turned his attention to the document in his hand again. Because he was far away from Hollywood, Eric did not personally experience the various activities in Hollywood recently, especially the sale of the copyright of The Matrix. There was no doubt that, just as Eric had guessed, the company that wanted the copyright of The Matrix the most was still Amblin Pictures, which was backed by Microsoft. Of course, several other major film companies were also more or less involved in this copyright competition. Of course, Firefly would not sell the copyright of The Matrix so easily. In fact, a large portion of the senior management did not want to sell The Matrix at all. They just wanted to drag this matter on, and let it slowly fall apart in the end. Therefore, Firefly's attitude was quite firm. When negotiating with the film companies that were interested in buying the copyright of The Matrix, they would not budge an inch. Under such circumstances, the relatively conservative companies such as Paramount withdrew one after another. In the end, only Warner Brothers, Universal, and Amblin were still holding on. However, because Firefly's conditions were more stringent, they were only willing to sell the production and distribution rights of the Matrix sequels, but they still retained the development rights of all non-film and television-related products such as comics, games, toys, and so on. In addition, the asking price was too high. Warner Brothers and Universal withdrew one after another. In the end, only Amblin was left and agreed to Firefly's request. According to the preliminary agreement, Amblin Pictures would buy the film and television production and distribution rights of The Matrix for $300 million in cash. The agreement did not stipulate that Amblin could only produce 2 sequels. In the future, if Amblin Pictures wanted to reboot the series, Firefly would not object. Of course, most fans of The Matrix knew the script of the trilogy. Presumably, after this incident, Amblin would not be able to resist the pressure to change the script. However, the agreement also stipulated that Firefly would retain the development rights of the Matrix comics, games, toys, and so on. This also included the development rights of the Matrix sequels and characters. Firefly would not participate in any of the distribution profits of the Matrix sequels such as cinemas, DVDs, videotapes, and so on. At the same time, Amblin Pictures had no right to participate in any of the distribution profits of the Matrix series. Although Amblin Pictures was ambitious, after all, they had just been established. At the moment, their most important task was to improve their distribution network. They did not have the ability to develop other products. Therefore, they agreed to this proposal. The development of other products happened to be Firefly's forte. Based on the cumulative global box office of The Matrix, which was about $600 million, Firefly's net income from theatrical screenings and videotapes alone was more than $300 million. However, even if The Matrix sequels did not follow the same path as in his previous life, Firefly would not lose out on this deal. Because of the overall recovery of the American economy, they had recovered $300 million in cash a few years in advance. Whether this money was invested in the entertainment industry or the high-tech industry, Eric was confident that this amount of money would multiply several times in the next few years. Although in the eyes of outsiders, Firefly's profits in recent years were very terrifying, only Eric himself knew that the Firefly system was burning money crazily in recent years. Most of the annual profits were quickly reinvested into the various companies under the Firefly system. In order to reduce the tax burden as much as possible, Eric had even begun to consider directly investing in the companies under Firefly Investments in the name of Firefly Group. Although this would indirectly involve about 27% of Firefly's minority shareholders in the Firefly Systems internet industry, it could save a lot of tax in the middle. When the surplus funds were directly transferred to project investment, the pre-tax gross profit of Firefly Group would be greatly reduced, but this would also allow Firefly to reduce the amount of corporate income tax paid. With Firefly's scale, the pre-tax profit and income tax ratio reached 35%, which was much higher than the 27% ratio of small and medium shareholders. Moreover, if the benefits were distributed to the small and medium shareholders in the form of investment, it would definitely gain the favor of these shareholders and increase Eric's control over Firefly, as well as the support of the forces behind these shareholders. However, if it was handed over to the IRS, Firefly would not get any substantial benefits. Thinking of this, Eric also made up his mind to discuss the matter of Clover Holdings, which originally belonged to the Disney Group, with Katzenberg on the next call. This was an investment company left over from the Disney era, but it had always been very small. If one did not carefully read the balance sheet of Firefly Group, most people would not even notice the existence of this investment company. Although Disney had developed rapidly, it did not have much energy to involve external investment. The largest investment project of Clover Holdings was to assist in the construction of the Disney Concert Hall in the Los Angeles Music Center. The investment scale was $20 million. However, that project had not made much profit so far because the project was initiated by the Disney family. The main purpose was to expand the influence of the Disney family. It was a very public welfare project. However, at this time, this investment company could be used as a window for Firefly Group's direct investment. The company law in the United States was very loose. It did not stipulate that a company could only operate in certain industries. For example, Berkshire Hathaway, which was controlled by Buffett, was only a textile factory at the beginning. Now it had become a comprehensive holding group, operating in various industries such as insurance, books, beverages, candy, entertainment, and so on. Chapter 806. Because Charlie's Angel Trio was busy with the global promotion of Charlie's Angels 2, they were unable to catch up with the filming of Casino Royale in Italy. Therefore, the originally planned month-long filming period in Italy ended 2 days before the opening of the Venice Film Festival. Most of the crew began to move to the United Kingdom. Eric was invited by the organizers of the Venice Film Festival to attend the opening ceremony of the 53rd Venice Film Festival and the premiere of Titanic that night. Cameron returned to Los Angeles at the beginning of the month. With the support of Firefly Records, he successfully completed the recording of My Heart Will Go On in 3 weeks. The singer he chose was still Celine Dion. With the intervention of Eric's remote phone call, the song was almost the same as the original version. A new copy of the film with the revised ending song was also sent to Los Angeles on September 28, the day before the opening ceremony. These days, because the crew of Casino Royale was filming in Venice and the most expensive film in history, Titanic, was about to premiere at the Venice Film Festival, as well as the Venice Film Festival itself, Venice was extremely lively. A large number of media, who were not very interested in the Venice Film Festival, came from all over the world because of these reasons. At the same time, Cameron was not alone. Katzenberg happened to be in France in the next few days to deal with some affairs at Disneyland Paris, so he came along. However, Katzenberg and Cameron did not have a good relationship. Both of them were hot-tempered and stubborn guys. Eric did not deliberately put the two of them together for the time being, as long as they did not fight. After all, there was no personal conflict between the two. One was for the company, and the other was for the film. Therefore, as long as the future box office performance of Titanic could meet expectations, Eric would come forward to mediate, and the grudge between the two would naturally be resolved. September 28. As the opening film, the premiere of Titanic was scheduled at 7 p.m. local time. Eric attended the opening ceremony of the film festival during the day, and made a brief appearance at the reception afterwards. He then left in a hurry to join the preparations for the premiere of Titanic. Just after 6 p.m., outside the Lido Palace, a large number of media reporters and fans had gathered on both sides of the long red carpet. It seemed to be livelier than the opening ceremony during the day. Although most of the management of Firefly Group was not very optimistic about Titanic, with the strong support of Eric, the company still invested a large amount of publicity budget for Titanic. In order to make the premiere more popular, everyone, including Eric, tried their best to contact the celebrity guests who could attend the premiere. In addition to most of the judges of the Venice Film Festival, and all the creators of Titanic, there were also heavyweight Hollywood and European stars such as Liam Neeson, Dustin Hoffman, Pierce Brosnan, Nicolas Cage, Bridget Fonda, Holly Hunter, Sophie Marceau, Juliette Binoche. Even though many people were pessimistic about Titanic, when these guests appeared on the red carpet, they often caused screams from the fans and photos from the media reporters. As the host, Eric appeared with Katzenberg and Cameron at the beginning of the red carpet. The three of them walked across the red carpet. After taking photos in the media area, they answered a few questions and entered the palace to greet the guests who came to support them. "Hey Liam, I'm glad you can come. I heard that the judges liked your Michael Collins very much this time. Good luck." "Oh Bridget, you are still so beautiful. Of course, if there is a chance for the next movie, I will definitely work with you. Cage, I thought you might not be able to spare the time." After a series of greetings, Eric had just sent Nicolas Cage into the movie palace when Sophie Marceau, who was wearing a long black dress and looking lazy, walked over. Sophie didn't seem to have changed at all compared to a few years ago. She had a head of smooth black hair, watery eyes, and a delicate face. When she smiled, it made people feel comfortable. Hi Sophie, long time no see. Eric walked forward and extended his hands to the girl. After filming Braveheart, although Sophie had taken on a few more roles in Hollywood, the two had not seen each other many times. This time, Eric had only called her tentatively. He thought that the other party would reject him after not contacting him for a long time. He did not expect Sophie to agree. After gently hugging Eric, Sophie let go of him. But there was a faint dissatisfaction on her face. Eric, I almost didn't want to talk to you. Oh, can I know why? Eric pretended to be shocked. Sophie rolled her eyes at him and said, Do you still remember what you promised me? Eric pretended to be puzzled. When he saw the girl wrinkling her nose angrily, he quickly said, Okay, of course I remember. Bond girl. However, I'm really sorry, Sophie. The production strategy of the 007 series has been greatly adjusted. This sequel does not have the role of the villain, so you can only wait for the next one. Okay, since you still remember this, I forgive you. Sophie waved her hand at him, and then smiled sweetly. I originally thought that you forgot all the nonsense you said to coax women. Oh, it's really sad that you think so. Eric pretended to be hurt and said, But okay, this is actually my fault. I forgot to inform you in advance. So, can you give me a chance to apologize? I'm curious how you plan to apologize. Sophie glanced at him flirtatiously and added, Mr. World's Richest Man, you can't be insincere. No problem. Eric readily said, I'll buy the Eiffel Tower tomorrow and get someone to send it to your house. Sophie's face was full of disdain. I don't want second-hand goods. Okay, then build a new one in your yard. Hee. Sophie laughed happily. When she saw a few more guests appear at the entrance, she stopped joking and waved at Eric. You continue to entertain the guests, I'll go in first. Eric nodded and said, Let's eat together when you have time. Sophie nodded and said, Okay, as long as you have time. I know you're a busy man. For a beauty like you, no matter how busy I am, I can find time. Oh, sweet words. Sophie smiled and patted Eric lightly. Without saying anything else, she turned and walked inside. Eric looked away and greeted the guests again. This time, it was two fat men, the brothers Harvey Weinstein and Bob Stan. Shakespeare's Love, starring Daniel Day-Lewis and Julia, had finished filming and was now in post-production. This film was focused on the Oscars and had nothing to do with the Venice Film Festival. However, as a professional award winner, Mike Mira would definitely not miss the Venice Film Festival. This time, the film was called The Frivolous Years. It was a biopic of an American street artist. The cast was very strong, including David Bowie, Dennis Cooper, William Dafoe, Gary Oldman, and a large number of Hollywood stars. Although Titanic was the opening film, it was purely an exhibition film, and would not compete for any awards at the Venice Film Festival. Therefore, many big names who came to participate in the film put aside their scruples and came to support, including the Weinstein brothers. After chatting with Harvey Weinstein for a while and greeting a few more guests, it was soon 7 o'clock. Eric entered the screening room. Cameron brought Leonardo and several other main creators to the stage to give a simple speech, and the film officially began. The lights in the screening room dimmed. Eric looked at the big screen. Cameron quickly came out from backstage and sat next to him. After all, it was the first public appearance of Titanic. Although he looked quite relaxed on the surface, Eric still noticed Cameron's tight grip on the armrest. Hey Jim, relax. I guess everyone will like this film. I hope so, Cameron muttered in a low voice. He then turned to Eric and raised his voice. Anyway, Eric, thank you. Eric nodded slightly and did not say anything. He just patted Cameron on the shoulder. In the screening room, as the image on the big screen lit up, the 300 invited guests, reporters, and fans firmly locked their attention on the big screen. Everyone wanted to see what this movie, which cost an unprecedented $215 million, looked like. However, the opening scene of the treasure hunt in the deep sea disappointed most of the people. It seemed that there was nothing special about it. This feeling of disappointment lasted until the appearance of the aged Rose, and the memories began to unfold. When the gigantic figure of the Titanic appeared at the British harbor, and the stunning appearance of the young Rose played by Rachel Weisz, the audience's disappointment was slightly alleviated. Those in the industry who were familiar with the filming process sighed in their hearts. Such a highly restored scene was indeed a money-burning weapon. However, they also couldn't help but secretly think, is it really necessary to create such extravagant and wasteful scenes for a movie? As the plot progressed, after a long period of foreshadowing, even the scene of Jack and Rose standing at the bow of the ship was like a dream to anyone who saw it. It was hard to stop the media and filmmakers from secretly positioning the film as a cliché love story between a princess and a coachman. Therefore, although the movie began to frequently enter tear-jerking mode in the second half, for many media reporters and filmmakers in the industry, the movie did not have many highlights except for some very exquisite special effects. It was not until the heavenly voice of the ending song, "My Heart Will Go On," that some people suddenly felt that it was probably the most attractive song in the entire movie. In fact, Eric had been paying attention to the reactions of the audience in the screening hall, mainly the small group of lucky ordinary audience members. When he noticed the two girls at the back left hugging each other and sobbing unabashedly at the last moment of Jack and Rose's farewell, Eric was probably relieved. The movie's main target audience was the young people, and the marketing plan that Firefly had formulated for Titanic was mainly aimed at this group of people. Eric was not too worried about the opinions of the film critics. As long as the media did not give a one-sided negative review, Titanic had a chance to create a miracle that had happened in the original space-time. When the ending song ended, the lights in the screening hall lit up, and there was a burst of applause. It was not cold, but it was not too enthusiastic either. Many people were even whispering to their companions while clapping. The audience began to disperse. Eric waved his hand and asked his assistant, Peter Ritchie, who was sitting nearby, to come over. He said, "I forgot to ask in advance. Is there a survey for ordinary fans of this movie?" Peter Ritchie shook his head and said, "No, Mr. Williams, including tonight and tomorrow's 3 screenings. The tickets are mainly for media reporters and film critics. There are only 50 tickets for ordinary fans through the event." With only 50 ordinary audience members, it was understandable that the distribution department did not arrange a survey. There were only 4 screenings of Titanic at the Venice Film Festival. Because of the large number of media reporters from all over the world, the tickets for these 4 screenings could be said to be in short supply. There were very few tickets for ordinary audiences. Only 4 screenings were arranged mainly to narrow down the audience as much as possible, so that it would be easier for Firefly to carry out post-production publicity operations. After all, it was a huge investment of more than $200 million. There was no harm in being careful. No matter how confident Eric was, he did not want to expand the number of screenings. 50 tickets it is. After thinking about it, Eric said, "Forget about tonight. Go and arrange it. No matter how many ordinary fans are left after tomorrow's screenings, I want to see the survey form for these people the day after tomorrow." Peter Ritchie did not ask anything else. He nodded and hurriedly left. Katzenberg, Cameron, and a few others stood not far away. When they saw Eric and his assistant finish talking, they walked over together. Katzenberg said, "Eric, let's go to the banquet hall. Everyone is already waiting there." Eric nodded and left with the others. They rushed to the banquet that the crew had specially organized for the guests. In the banquet hall of the Lido Island Hotel, Eric shuttled through the crowd, greeted the guests one by one, and chatted casually. After socializing for a full half an hour, he escaped to the balcony outside the banquet hall to get some fresh air. This was the second floor of the hotel, facing the sea. Looking into the distance, it was the brightly lit main city of Venice. However, there was already someone on the balcony. She was wearing a long black dress, holding a glass of red wine in her hand. She leaned against the railing and quietly looked at the distant sky. Eric walked over and leaned against the railing to look at Sophie's side profile. He smiled and said, "The beauty is alone, and no one is hitting on her. What a waste." Sophie smiled reluctantly and said softly, "Eric, you're the 5th one. Also, I'm also hesitating. Do you want to be the 5th one to be chased away by me?" In the faint light, Eric noticed that Sophie's expression was obviously a little lonely. He asked, "Why are you suddenly unhappy?" You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.